Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the y'all mean a revolution. And so it begins, y'all. It already done started. ABC releases a graphic saying Kamala wins. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform. Y'all let everybody know that Core Figure is live. And we knew they was going to start this. We've been looking at the voter boxes being firebombed. Thousands of people falsely put on voter rolls. Now we got ABC coming out in a swing state saying Kamala won that race. They ain't even win. The election ain't happened yet.
Graphics in my system and they pop up like this. So this whole, we were just testing the graphic to make sure. Okay, so ABC News affiliate in Scranton, Pennsylvania, this is WNEP, made a big mistake. Let me show you this mistake. See this graphic right here? Harris, Trump, this is the election. See that check mark next to Harris? That this is during the Formula One on Sunday. This was during the Mexican Grand Prix. And they aired these election results declaring people winners. Here it is again. This is the Harris-Trump graphic that popped up on the screen.
Come on, man. Here they was. So people, I'm glad people seen this because they tried to erase it. Then they came out and say, oh, they were just working on the graphics. Yeah, you're working on the graphics by telling us Kamala Harris won this important swing state of Pennsylvania. No, you wasn't. You was prearranging the fix. That's what they was doing, and they got caught.
Screen. You could imagine the surprise. Sunday viewers watching Formula One, suddenly they see the election has been declared for Kamala Harris. They're thinking, wait a minute, when's the election? Did it already happen? Did I miss it? You know, you can imagine the shock that some people are having. But what WNEP claimed, because here it is, here's the graphic. Let me just show you this larger. Harris winning 52%, Trump 47%. And then you see the totals there, 3 million, 3.2 million for Harris, 2.9 million for Trump. Says 100% reporting. What in the world happened here? Well, they're claiming
she was down in every swing state. We've been reporting on that. She's down in every swing state. If they're saying they just was trying to make sure the graphics work, well, put the truth up. Trump is winning in Pennsylvania. Why are you saying you checking your graphics, but you put Harris with the win? That's bullshit. And they was trying to pre-rig it. And they fucked up and released it way too early.
WNEP in Pennsylvania, in Scranton, Pennsylvania, is saying that, oops, our bad. We made this graphic prematurely. We were testing the system to make sure that it was going to work. And so we put out these election results. Our bad. They actually said, quote, the numbers were...
If you're testing the system to see if it worked, why don't you tell the truth? Trump is up in every swing state. Why does your test consist of a lie and fake news? Kamala Harris is not up. She's losing those swing states. So you wasn't trying to test the graphics. You're trying to fix the election.
Were not reflective of any actual vote count. Pennsylvania law does not allow mail-in ballots to be taken out of their envelopes until 7 a.m. on election day, and no votes of any kind can be counted in Pennsylvania until after the polls close at 8 p.m. They said that they apologize for any, it says WNEP regrets the error and apologizes for any confusion. We have taken steps to ensure that it does not happen again. When people are already really nervous about what is going on with the elections, when people are already feeling like, can I really trust this? Is my vote really going to count? How do I know you're not going to misrepresent my vote or throw it away or just fudge the numbers and make them up? Because I'm not there to count the votes myself, so I don't really know. And which individual human being can count 3 million votes or even more than that? I mean, when you look at, this is like 6 million votes. No one person can count 6 million votes. So you're relying on, in good faith, all of these other people also counting their specific precincts boxes worth of votes. They've got multiple people in multiple precincts counting all of these votes, and it takes all of them together to say, this is my tally, this is my tally, this is mine. And you have to rely on I mean, you have to rely that they're being truthful. You have to rely on, if they're feeding a machine that's doing the counting, that the machine doesn't have a bug in it, which we're going to get to the bugs in the Dominion voting system here in a second. But there's a lot of good faith that goes into casting our vote and hoping that all 330 million, well, I guess it wouldn't be 330. There's 330 million Americans, but of course there's underage. A lot of those are children.
More than that.
But, you're looking at a lot of Americans and a lot of votes potentially that need to be counted. And you're kind of we all have to have just good faith that these elections are, that our vote actually is being counted properly. So when this type of stuff happens, when they show a graphic on the screen showing us that, Harris wins and here's the election tallies, and they say, whoops, this is, we were just testing the system. How could you, what I don't understand is this, if this is a computerized system that is going to show, so it's one of two things, right? Like either your system is connected, your software that's showing these numbers is connected to some sort of, county reporting system, and it's showing the numbers in real time, in which case you wouldn't be able to show these numbers right now because it's not technically supposed to be connected to any system. Or if it was, it would just show 000% reporting and no check mark by anybody's name, right? You would think that it would show that. Otherwise, you've just created this graphic. You're testing the graphic. Like you already, they claimed, oh, we were testing this graphic just to make sure that it works on election day. Well, of course, graphics that are pre-made work. You put them up all the time, every day. Your network is filled with graphics all day, every day. You stick them up on the screen, they work. You don't need to test whether or not your graphics work. I didn't test this graphic before I showed it to you guys. I mean, I just know it works. I put all my graphics in my system and they pop up like this. So this whole, we were just testing the graphic to make sure it worked. What are you talking about exactly? Either this is connected to real-time vote counting, in which case, where did these numbers come from? Or this is just a graphic that you insert into the system like you do every other graphic, in which case, why do you need to test it? I mean, it doesn't. So this is sowing, anybody that thinks about this for 2 seconds is going to say, this doesn't add up. This doesn't add up. And your apology doesn't add up. What is this? What is going on here? But I will show you this. Let me just show you this other graphic here. So this is from, because I want to show you the numbers. This is from the election in 2020. And if you look at the totals here, and this is with 76% of the turnout in Pennsylvania. This is the final vote count from the 2020 election. Biden got 3.4 and Trump got 3.3. So that is a larger number than this total here, with Harris getting 3.29 and Trump getting 2.98. The real numbers from last election were higher. Now they could say, if they were planning on, let's say, messing with the election and messing with the totals, and if the suspicion that people are having is accurate, then I guess they could say, well, we had fewer people voting this time around than last time. Maybe they could say something like that along those lines. Or, I have it. At this point, especially, I think this was a test. Guys, I'm not even speculate what this was, because that doesn't even make sense to me. Here I am. I'm doing a show for you every day. So I can tell you, you don't need to test these graphics unless they're connected.
They weren't tested. They accidentally released it. You see, they're going to fire whoever did that. They wasn't testing the graphics. They accidentally released it too early. See, they was going to release Harris Wins on election day. And if Trump come out and say it was rigged, then you already know that's what they got the military for. The military already got permission to shoot the citizens if y'all try to pull an uprising about what they finna try to do. We know she's losing in every swing state. Why are you putting she up in any swing states? Why they keep lying on TV saying this is a close race? Get the hell out of here.
To some sort of a new software that is going to show the tally, the real time, it's going to show the real time count. In which case, what are you connecting that to? Is that going, does the county put out a number for you to broadcast in real time? Maybe they do. Maybe they have that kind of software. Are you pulling it from a website? Like, where is this number coming from? And then I can understand you needing to test that. But why would the numbers then show up in this test when there are no numbers to be had? It should show 0, 0 if that's the case. So I'm as confused as anybody on this. But that's the story on that one. So we will just keep our eyes open, I suppose, on election night and beyond. Okay. Here is another interesting story about voting. Dominion voting machines are apparently experiencing a nationwide issue after reporting a bug in their programming. This is Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson talking about it.
Issues with the programming of the VATs with specifically
Yes.
from Dominion.
Mhm.
Why was that only caught in the past few days, and why can't it be fixed? I saw the release with the.
Yeah, this is a nationwide issue with Dominion voter access terminals in the counties that use them. And the voter access terminals, of course, not all the machines, just the ones that are accessible, have an issue with the straight party voting and a programming issue that's again affected the machines nationwide. And I think all of us that use Dominion machines were unhappy to learn about this during the testing period and as early voting began. So we're working with Dominion to seek accountability on that front, and also are working with our clerks to ensure voters are aware of this programming issue that will require them to ensure they are voting every section on the ballot.
Bigger issue in Michigan because we do allow voters to cross over in ways that a lot of other states don't.
Because we have straight party, it's not struck me as I've talked to my other colleagues in other states. They're just as upset about it as we are. So yeah, or surprised.
Okay, so what exactly does this mean for these Dominion voting machines? So essentially, and this is according to the Secretary of State of Michigan, this is a nationwide issue. This is not just a Michigan issue with these Dominion voting machines. But apparently, if you use VAT, which is Voter Assist Terminal, so this is for people with disabilities, they have a special way of being able to vote that's built into the software. I think it's very similar, like when you go to a banking ATM. So if you are a split ticket voter, so let's say you are typically a Democrat and you want to vote Democrat for all the positions, but you don't want to vote for Kamala Harris. And, you're like, look, they took the old guy out to pasture. I didn't vote for Kamala Harris. She's unpopular. I'm not voting for her. I'm voting for somebody else. That would be a split ticket. If you are going to vote split ticket using VAT on a Dominion machine nationwide, apparently, then you will get an error message. Your vote it won't work. So what they're saying is what you have to do is do a straight ticket. So you have to just vote straight Democrat or vote straight Republican, and then you make your different choices. And then you have to exit the ballot, print it out, print out your, I actually don't know exactly what they're claiming what these people have to do. Like they would have to then, my understanding is print out the ticket, and then you can change your votes and then cast your ballot. So then I don't know how they would go about counting that. That to me is also because a lot of times these ballots are then fed into a counting machine, I think. I actually don't know. I mean, that's the problem, right? None of us really know exactly how our votes are counted. And especially when there's an error like this, we don't really know then what happens. And that's a big issue. And so this has to do with these Dominion voting machines. And a lot of people have been questioning Dominion voting machines. And others have said, it's totally false. There's nothing to question. There's nothing here. The big counter, I think, to there being any sort of meddling on these Dominion voting machines or any voting machine is the fact that they're not connected to the internet. Okay, so I'm going to read this to you. This is voting machine security FAQs. This is from a county in Illinois, and they put this out there. A lot of counties put this out there, like, don't worry about voting security. They're not connected to the internet. Everything's cool. This is what they say. So they say, it's a popular theory that voting machines are hacked when an election doesn't turn out the way one would like. But in order for a machine to be hacked, it is to be connected to the internet. Is that true? So they say, at no time are McAlpin, I think it's McAlpin County, this is in Illinois, machines, at no time are they connected to the internet. Here's the process. 1, you vote on a touch screen and then print out your paper ballot. This machine is never connected to the internet. 2, you insert your paper ballot into the tabulator to be counted, right? That's what I thought. So I don't know exactly these people that have these issues where they then have to change their ticket. Will the tabulator know how to count that? Then it says the the hanging chads in Florida, things like that, right? So will it recognize, it made you vote straight ticket, but now we're going to, like, how, I just don't know if it's going to know this. It says then the tabulator is never connected to the internet. You insert your paper ballot. So then it says 3, after the polls close, election judges return the tabulator and paper ballots to the courthouse. We take the flash drive from the tabulator and insert it into a laptop. Okay. A laptop, which is, by the way, it's okay. So then it says, I spoke to saying, it says, this laptop has never been and never will be connected to the internet. But is that true? I mean, how did you get the software on the laptop? So they say like the original operating system software onto the laptop. So you would have had to ensure that you set up these laptops without the internet using software that you've downloaded using what? A thumb drive, or somehow you put the operating system onto the laptop. Same thing with these voting machines. Somehow you got the software onto the voting machine. How did you get that onto the voting machine? How did you get the operating software onto the laptop just to get the laptop to turn on and function and have an operating system? You needed to use some way of getting this onto the machine. How do I know whatever you use, be a thumb drive or a disk drive, how do I know that wasn't corrupted? How do I know the software itself that was developed somewhere by somebody isn't corrupted? Right? There's a lot of, it doesn't matter if it's connected to the internet. There's a lot of ways to get bugs into systems. So it says, once the results are uploaded to the laptop, we take a completely different flash drive and copy over a set of results. Again, this flash drive, who manufactured the flash drive? How did the flash drive end up to you? In whose hands was this flash drive before it got to you? But it's all about the internet. They're never connected to the internet, so don't worry. Okay, there's a lot of ways, a lot of processes before we don't need the internet. This is, this would be the only step that potentially could be hacked. Okay, so they say once the results are uploaded to the laptop, we take a completely different flash drive and copy over a set of results to upload to the public website on a totally different computer. And this would be the only step that potentially could be hacked. That's not true. You could hack. So for one, how did they get into each and every voting machine? How do they get the names? How do you get Harris and Trump into those voting machines? Because last election, it was Trump and Biden, right? And every election, you have to change these out. How did you do that? So it's not connected to the internet. I understand that. But you have to then get a thumb drive or a disk drive. You've got to do something in order to get those names onto all of the voting machines. And I really doubt one individual is going in on every voting machine and typing in the names for every single, and typing up every single voting measure and, all the propositions, everything in there. I doubt some person is going in and physically typing all of that into every single individual machine. No, it's uploaded into the machine. Well, how is it uploaded into the machine? Oh, with thumb drive. Oh, with thumb drives. You don't need the internet. Who had access to that thumb drive before you put it into the machine? How do I know, as a normal person who's just volunteering at my voting precinct, how do I, and now, or maybe I'm the elected official. Maybe I'm the elected official who's overseeing elections, and I know I'm not corrupt, but you're handing me a thumb drive. I didn't make the thumb drive. I didn't put the software on the thumb drive, and I didn't program the software that goes on the thumb drive. So I'm just taking everybody's word for it that this thumb drive has no bugs. Everything's cool. Yeah, it's not the internet, so it's fine. I'm going to stick it in the machine and all's well. Then they say here, so they're claiming that's the only step that could potentially be hacked because that would go on the public website, which would be then connected to the internet, obviously, because it's a website. But let's say that it was the results website would show the wrong results, but the official results. So they're saying, okay, so the website maybe would be hacked and they show the wrong results, but the official results on the laptop would not have been changed. The paper ballots would not have been changed, which who is going to count 6 million paper ballots just in the state of Pennsylvania alone? Sure, it wouldn't be great that our result website was showing the wrong numbers, but the actual results and counts itself would not be changed whatsoever. They literally think we're stupid. They just think, look, we could just tell you it's not connected to the internet, and you're not going to question the entire process of how the software gets from everywhere. Even just the software that gets installed on the damn operating laptop, the operating system that gets downloaded onto the laptop that then is supposed to run this software that's supposed to tabulate. I mean, even that, but don't worry, it just wasn't connected to the internet. Then after election day, the state randomly sends us 5 precincts as well as one of the early and mail vote tabulators to retabulate or audit. We have to rerun every ballot through the same tabulator and get the exact same number of ballots cast and votes counted for each candidate. If they do not match up, we have to investigate to find the discrepancy. Okay, so they're saying after election day, the state randomly sends 5 precincts. How do I know it's random? How do you know it's random? How do you know the person who's supposed to be selecting the random precincts isn't corrupt or has been gotten to or has their own agenda? it's a lot of faith here that we're having to put into hoping that our votes matter. Okay, so then I asked the question. I asked this just of ChatGPT, just to be honest with you, of how, okay, if these voting machines are not connected to the internet, how do they receive the software updates? Now we see that Dominion voting machines have a bug. Well, how would have Dominion fixed that bug? They would have had to send out some sort of software update. How would that software update have gotten onto the voting machine? So this answer from ChatGPT, just take it for what it's worth. If you don't want to trust it whatsoever, then fine. But it's claiming that voting machines typically receive software updates and new information for elections through a secure process that doesn't rely on internet connection. Here's how it generally works. So even chat, even chat is bringing up the internet. I just asked, how do they get the different names onto the voting machines each election cycle? And chat spits out, not with the internet, right? So they're really pushing this. No internet, so no hacking. So number one, it says physical media. So updates are often provided via physical media, such as a USB drive or secure memory card. Election officials receive the updated software and necessary data from Dominion or authorized sources, which they then load onto the machines manually. Right. Okay. Well, so I'm the election official who's just going to load this software on manually. I didn't program the software. I didn't make the software. I didn't make the damn thumb drive, even the USB drive. I didn't make any of it. I have to just trust that it's all cool. 2, secure protocols. The process of transferring software updates and election data is designed to be secure. This may involve encryption and strict protocols to prevent tampering or unauthorized access, unless you're the guy who knows how to do that, right? 3, pre-election testing. Before each election, voting machines are thoroughly tested to ensure they are working correctly with the new software and data. This testing process typically includes checks for security vulnerabilities. You mean like how Scranton, Pennsylvania just tested the results on Formula One? You mean that kind of testing? Because we saw what that test result gave. A Harris win. Local control finally says, since the machines are not connected to the internet, local election officials have control over the updates, reducing the risk of outside interference. The election officials are not software programmers. Election officials are not, they're not software geniuses or computer nerds. They're just elected officials. They're local volunteers, or they're, these people, how would they wouldn't be able to look at this thumb drive and say, yeah, looks good to me. Nobody tampered with it. It looks good. Stick it in the machine. I'm sure all will be okay. I mean, so to make this claim like, oh, it's just the internet, guys, don't worry about it. That's not enough of a defense, I think, or enough of not a defense, I should say, but at least it's not enough of a guarantee. It's not enough to make us feel like, yeah. So I think it's fair for us as voters, as we move forward and as there's increasing questions, and we see all the time, the United States will point the finger at foreign countries all the time and say, well, their elections were rigged. They messed with the results. Well, how did they do it? How was it that what are you accusing them of doing, and how did they rig their elections? So if they're able to do this in whatever way you're claiming they were able to do it, why don't we do something for our elections in order to protect us from that, rather than you just swearing up and down, like, I swear, they're fine, they're cool. Maybe we should take some more steps. I don't know what those steps are. I'm just putting this out. I have no idea what those steps are. I have no idea what the right answer is. People say paper ballots. Well, I just watched a bunch of paper ballot boxes get lit on fire and those ballots destroyed. So I don't know if that's really the answer either. I don't know what the answer is, but I know that it's really an insult to our intelligence for them to just say nothing can be hacked because nothing hit the internet. Well, there's a lot of other ways from my viewpoint where this could happen, but it just, the bottom line is we have to be able to trust our voting systems. We have to be able to trust the results of the election. That is absolutely essential to maintaining a democracy. That's essential. So we have to go above and beyond in order to protect our elections. Above and beyond, no matter what that is. For people to, we don't want to show IDs. Why not? Why aren't we just going above and beyond? To me, I think it is kind of strange that I don't have to show my ID. I literally received a ballot in the mail here in the state of California, Anybody can fill it out, honestly, and remail it back in or drop it off. I guess drop it off. I don't even know because I haven't voted yet. I don't know if I'm supposed to. I forget because I think I normally drop it off or I go into the precinct. I really haven't done much mail-in voting, but I don't remember how I did it last time. I think I had to drop it off. I think I filled it out and dropped it off in a box that could be lit on fire. But I think, we've got to do more in order to protect our elections and make people feel more confident in the results. I think that's essential, and they should be spending much more time on this and doing everything they can to ensure that these types of mistakes with bugs in the machines or showing results during Formula One on a Sunday, those things just cannot happen if we're going to be maintaining some sort of election integrity in this country. Thank you so much for watching. This was just a clip from the.
Now I'm finna prove to y'all they don't have no integrity. That just was I just wanted to open up with showing y'all that they already releasing graphics saying Kamala wins. These people are out of their mind. But they're not only doing that, they're also leaking the voting system online password to anybody who want it. The Democrats are. And this lady should be locked up for doing this. But it's one thing after the other. Let's line up all the evidence. One thing after the other so they could steal this election.
Morning, partial passwords to our state's voting systems apparently leaked to the public on the Secretary of State's website.
Yeah, so Colorado's Republican Party accused the Colorado Secretary of State's office of, quote, quietly
Colorado? Where did I hear about Colorado before? Dang, is Colorado where they was trying to take Trump off the ballot? When they didn't even want him on the ballot? Dang, Colorado did do that. That didn't work. So what does the Colorado Democrats do now? Leak the state voting system password so everybody can have it and do whatever they want with the voting system. Yes, that's exactly what they did.
Removing a publicly accessible spreadsheet from the office's website that contained passwords for those election systems. So Fox 31's Carly Moore is in studio kind of breaking down what exactly happened with this. I mean, you think now they kind of tout the fact that the elections are so secure. So you wonder, how did this even happen?
Yeah, and maybe also, why didn't they just come out and tell us about the error in the first place?
Right. Yeah.
Kirk, Andrea, good morning. So Jenna Griswold's office has long touted that Colorado elections are the gold standard when it comes to security, but the GOP says this type of security breach could have far-reaching implications. The Secretary of State's office says they're aware that the tab should have never been on their website to begin with. Now, the office acknowledged their website had a hidden tab with partial passwords on it, but added that does not pose a threat to election security and will not affect how ballots are counted.
Secretary Griswold told me today that she had not decided whether to tell you, the public, about that password leak before she got called out on it publicly today. I asked Secretary Griswold whether she takes responsibility for this election security breach in the same way that she has held others accountable. And we discussed a string of errors by her office that can damage voter confidence.
It was a mistake.
To be very clear, we do not see this.
Now, when I first seen this lady face, I'm like, then where do I know this lady from? This old wide-faced lady. You know, I know these weirdos when I see them. So I know this lady from somewhere. I just kept listening to the story, and then it hit me. This was the weirdo, deranged psychopath who hates Trump and hates his voters, who was on MSNBC saying Trump should not be on the ballot. She had took him off the ballot. She had blocked him. And then the Supreme Court put him back on the ballot. So I want you to understand that. She took him off the ballot, Supreme Court said, no, that's unconstitutional, put him back on. And then all of a sudden, she put the password online for everybody to have it, but they want us to believe this was a mistake.
As a full security threat.
Revolutionary salute to our family. Y'all, that's our family. Alton Franklin for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. I absolutely appreciate the love, family. Salute to you. So she needs to go to prison because when she didn't get her damn way and get Trump off that Colorado ballot, her next nefarious scheme was to put the password online so everybody can get it. And they finna expose her live on TV by doing that too.
Threat to the state. This is not a security threat.
You do frequent media interviews warning of the insider threats to elections. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security defines an insider threat as somebody who uses authorized access wittingly or unwittingly to do harm. Did the actions of your office pose an insider threat to elections?
No.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about some pre-election day shenanigans that the mainstream liberal media will ignore because of their obsession with Trump, okay? And this story that we got to talk about involves Colorado's Secretary of State by the name of Griswald, who is extremely Trump deranged. Now, if you guys do not remember this lady, let me remind you, because this is the same woman that decided to launch the infamous challenge to President Trump being on the Colorado ballot. She removed Trump from the ballot because in her mind, Trump was an insurrectionist and he was therefore ineligible to run for president of the United States. And eventually the Supreme Court had to smack down this woman and let her know that, hey, you're getting a little bit too big for your britches. And I just want to play this clip here of her reaction to the Supreme Court decision so that you guys, again, understand exactly who this woman is and how Trump deranged she is. Take a look.
Do you feel betrayed by the liberal justices on the court?
Thanks for having me on, and absolutely not. My reaction foremost is that I'm glad the Supreme Court issued a decision. Americans will be voting today and tomorrow across the nation, especially in states where there's early voting, and they deserve to know whether or not Trump is an eligible candidate. But beyond that, I am disappointed in the decision. I do believe it is up to a state to decide whether to put an oath-breaking insurrectionist onto our ballots or not. The Supreme Court obviously disagrees. And of course, the state of Colorado will follow the Supreme Court's decision.
This is a criminal who should be locked up.
Well, in fact, it was what the Supreme Court decided was that it is not up to a state when it comes to a federal office like the presidency. It is up to Congress. What would you like to see Congress do with that information?
That's right. So the Supreme Court said Congress would have to act first to effectuate Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which disqualifies oath-breaking insurrectionists. And I think logistically, this is basically a run for office, no questions asked for federal or oath-breaking insurrectionist candidates. Because the likelihood of this Congress passing any type of law restricting oath breakers from running for federal office is highly unlikely.
Yeah, so you see that, you heard that. This woman clearly upset over the fact that the Supreme Court, including the liberal justices, smacked down her attempt to overthrow democracy, like literally overthrow democracy by removing Trump from the Colorado ballot. Okay, and now we have to talk about this new story involving this woman who seems to be more focused on Trump than her actual job, which is to protect the election integrity of the state. Because apparently this woman, her office, inadvertently posted a spreadsheet to its website with a hidden tab that included voting system passwords. Yes, this is the same woman who seems to be more obsessed with Trump than actually doing her damn job. And she posted a spreadsheet with voting system passwords, which clearly is very negligent, right? And something that she probably should resign over, but she's refusing to resign. So I want to talk about it. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the clip.
Passwords to Colorado's voting machines were posted online by the Secretary of State's office and left there for anyone to see for months. Democratic Secretary of State Jenna Griswold had known about that error since last week, but didn't tell the county clerks who run elections.
Those passwords alone are not enough to get access to the voting machines, but it's the latest in a string of errors by Griswold's office that have undermined voter confidence in elections. Yet Griswold told me today she will not resign.
To be very clear, we do not see this as a full security threat.
Democratic Secretary of State Jenna Griswold acknowledged after being called out by Colorado Republicans that her office leaked voting system passwords and is now in a scramble across the state to change the passwords and determine if anyone inside clerks' offices combined that password with the internal access they would have needed to actually get inside the machines.
The fact that the BIOS passwords were online is concerning, but we are satisfied with the mitigation steps that the state is taking.
Matt Crane, head of the County Clerks Association, a former Republican clerk, says layers of security provide protection.
Every Coloradan votes on a paper ballot, and the paper ballots are audited.
Secretary Griswold deflected responsibility for the leaked passwords and said she might not have told the public if word didn't get out.
In 2021, when Mesa County's voting system passwords leaked, your office said, quote, the public disclosure of the BIOS passwords for one or more components of Mesa County's voting system alone constitutes a serious breach of voting system security protocols. By that standard, did your office commit a serious breach of voting system security protocols?
Well, to push back on you, Kyle, that sentence is in the press release, but there is a much bigger press release. And part of that investigation in Mesa County was 2 sets of passwords, unauthorized access, stolen passwords, and it was in a different time. Since 2021 and what happened in Mesa County, our security has improved, including the 24/7 hour cameras, including the badge and access. The law has been significantly strengthened since then. We have multiple layers in place to ensure situations like Mesa County don't occur.
Leaked passwords.
Wow. AKA rules for thee, not for me, right? When we do something wrong, when we have a serious security breach, oh, well, it's not that serious, right? It's not really that serious, okay? But when it happens, you know, in another place, oh, well, it's very serious, okay? And you must punish those people to the fullest extent of the law. But when we get caught and we do something like that, nah, you don't understand. More context, okay? More details are necessary. You don't understand that there's a lot more to it. Again, it's just funny how this works. But what you have here is clearly somebody who was more focused on Trump than actually doing her damn job. These passwords were exposed for months. Now, they claim that the passwords in and of themselves were not enough to get inside of the voting machines, okay? However, if you worked for the office and you had access to these passwords and also more internal access as well too, then reasonably you could get access, right? Now, they claim that that hasn't happened, or they don't know if that has happened, but still, the fact that a security breach like this happened in such a negligent way warrants this woman stepping down. Again, especially considering how this woman spent taxpayer dollars to go after her political opponent just for it to get struck down by the Supreme Court. Again, clearly she's not focused on doing her actual job.
The latest error by Griswold's office undermining public trust in elections. In 2022, her office sent 30,000 non-citizens an invitation to register to vote.
Wow.
That same year, her office mistakenly notified Coloradans who had voted that they still needed to vote, caused confusion for the county clerks, who were not notified by Griswold's office that they had.
So not only is this woman making mistakes, but she's not notifying people of the mistakes, right? So she is extremely negligent, careless, again, more worried about Trump than doing her damn job. And then when she makes the mistake, she goes out of her way to try to cover up the mistake by not informing the public and other officials that, hey, this mistake was made. Hey, there was a security breach, right? Passwords to the voting systems have been exposed. Yeah, we might need to do something about this. We might need to let the public know and be transparent about it, because we want people to have faith in the system, okay? We want people to have faith that the people that are running the system actually know what the hell they're doing. But no, that's not what she's doing here. This woman is clearly corrupt, okay? And this is a problem. This is a huge problem, okay? Again, her priorities seem to be in the wrong place. More focused on Trump than actually doing what she's supposed to be doing.
Leaked the voting system passwords.
Given your office's repeated errors that have damaged confidence in our elections, which you say is paramount, will you resign?
Absolutely not, Kyle. Colorado is tied for #1 in confidence in the country in our elections. We have stood up to situations time and time again to protect the right of Coloradans, going over and beyond what anybody would ask of civil servants in this office.
Secretary of State's office says that they will be in charge of investigating their own actions.
Wow. Yeah, we're going to investigate ourselves. And of course, they're going to find nothing, right? They're going to find we didn't do anything wrong. And yeah, she should keep her job, which is a damn shame. Okay, this woman should be in jail, right? Let's keep it 100. Not only should she resign, she should be in jail. She should be in jail for trying to overthrow democracy within her own state by removing Trump from the ballot. She knew that case wasn't going to go anywhere. She knew that what she tried to do was not constitutional, but she did anyway. She wasted taxpayer dollars trying to go after Trump, right? Even though she knew that it wasn't going to hold up in the Supreme Court. And lo and behold, her own office is not in order while she's spending all of her time and resources trying to go after her political opponent. But yet she's inadvertently leaking passwords to the voting systems on the internet for anybody to see. It's astonishing. It really is. So, you know, just another story about Democrat Party incompetence and the fact that, you know, they're not going to be held accountable, okay, because Democrats are allergic to accountability and responsibility. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share. A Black conservative.
Now, that's just the beginning of this treachery that's going on. Now, this lets you know that we're in for a bunch of BS in this election.
Impact your morning drive. Well, Election Day is now just 5 days away, and Michiganders all across the states are already casting their ballots.
Yeah, this morning, a University of Michigan student, though, is facing felony charges for illegally voting.
He signed a document identifying himself as a U.S. citizen, when in actuality, he's a Chinese national, and that vote will still count.
7 News Detroit reporter Brittany Tulis is joining us live at the University of Michigan this morning.
That illegal vote will still count. Now, some people say, well, that's just one vote. Well, we don't know how many people like this there is across America. They just telling us about this guy. But what's important is his vote won't be taken back. His illegal vote still will count in our election.
Morning, as students on campus there are speaking out about this voting violation. And Brittany, how did this happen?
Yeah, Alicia, that ballot was cast right here at the University Museum of Art. You can see the sign right there. It's one of the campus voting hubs. The Secretary of State's office says that student took several steps to register to vote, including using his U of M student ID. Secretary of State's office also adding that once that ballot goes through the tabulator, there is no way of getting it back.
Oh, really?
Everybody here, they shoved in your face like, oh, are you voting? Are you voting? Vote early. Like, everybody needs to vote.
Signs pointing U of M students to the 6 early voting sites are all over the university's campus. On Sunday at the University Museum of Art, a 19-year-old international student and non-citizen was able to register and cast a ballot.
So I'm not surprised that it happened, but I'm surprised that like it actually counted and they actually got credit for voting, or how he even got as late as it did.
The Chinese student used his U of M student ID to register. They also showed documents proving they lived in Ann Arbor and signed a document identifying as a U.S. citizen, according to the Secretary of State's office. And once a ballot runs through the tabulator, it's counted and there's no way to take it back. The student now facing a felony charge.
I kind of expect that because I know how voting is the right as a citizen, and it's a big deal. So any foreigner don't want to mess with it.
Freshman Singh is an international student. His friend Benjamin Zhang lived in China for a decade, but was born here in the U.S.
I was very surprised. I didn't expect it to be possible because when I voted, it required a lot of proof.
Per Michigan state law, proof of ID is required to register to vote. A student ID can be used if that person doesn't have a driver's license or state ID, their preferred proof of ID. This ballot was found after the student called the clerk's office asking for the ballot back. That clerk reporting that to police.
This is the one time it was documented. How many other times is this happening that we don't really know about?
Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson saying in a statement, non-citizen voting is an extremely isolated and rare event. Investigations in multiple states and nationwide have found no evidence of large numbers of non-citizens registering to vote. Even less common is a non-citizen actually casting a ballot. When it does happen, we take it extremely seriously. Now, in this case, we do not know who that ballot was cast.
Oh, Bill BS. Y'all know who that liberal guy was voting for. Give us a break. You don't know who that guy was voting for? Voting for his Asian homegirl. That's what he vote. He's voting for his Asian homegirl. They want to rule the world now. An Asian can be in power. Who you think he was voting for?
Well, tonight in the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, boy, the Democrats are really starting to panic now. They're panicking because in Georgia, they're having low black voter turnout when it comes to early election. And you'll see here in this particular article that most black people do a lot of their voting on early voting. And then, of course, some show up election day. But if they're seeing low voter turnout during early voting, that's spelling a big trouble for Vice President Kamala Harris. So let's go ahead and get into this. You can see Georgians are voting early at record pace, but Democrats have concerns. Say the percentage of voters, black voters so far is below the 30% target party leaders and political observers like to see. All right. So they're talking about a state rep, Carl Gillard. He's a Democrat from Savannah, joined an emergency Zoom call. Emergency, y'all. With about 70 other black Georgia faith leaders Monday night to discuss their concerns about the state's latest early voting figures. All them rallies y'all doing in Georgia, and you mean to tell me y'all are in trouble? Y'all concerned? Let's say most prominent leaders of the state's black faith community have thrown their support behind Kamala Harris and her White House race against former President Trump. They say the latest early voting data has given them cause for concern about Harris's chances of winning Georgia's 16 crucial electoral college votes in the battleground state that was decided less than 12,000 votes 4 years ago. Now, they say the good news, according to Gillard and other leaders, is the other Georgia Legislative Black Caucus and more than 3 million people have already cast their vote as of 11:20 a.m. Tuesday. So that means more than 42% of the estimated 7.2 million active voters on the state's registration rolls have already cast their ballots at a record-setting pace, according to the Office of Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. They say the higher turnout rates usually benefit Democrats in competitive races. Of course, they're talking about more of that, but this is the issue. They say among the voters are more than 782,000 black Georgians whose turnout rate has dropped more than 29% on the record-setting first day of early voting. They say when many black seniors travel to the polls with canes, walkers, and wheelchairs, boosting the state's overall voting turnout rate to about 25% since then. They say that's bad news for Harris and down ballot Democrats, according to Gillard and other prominent GLBC members who spoke with Capital B Atlanta on Monday. They said North Carolina to the other southern region battleground state have also seen low black voter turnout during its early voting process. So some people choosing the couch. If let me tell y'all something. If black folks choose the couch, if black folks, of course, vote for Trump, Jill Stein, Cornel West, whoever they're voting for, right? That means that they're not supporting Kamala. This is not good for her. So they say black folks who overwhelmingly support Democrats in most elections comprise about 31% of Georgia's overall population. Elected leaders and political observers say Democrats looking for a guaranteed win in the state office races. They say in Georgia, they say usually need to hit a 30% black turnout rate. They say in black turnout during early voting is usually higher than it is on election day. They said 25% is low, according to a James Beverly. He said we need around 31%. He said Gillard said he began seeing the Democrat Party warning signs last week in Savannah. They said where nearly 52% of residents were black in 2022, according to census data. It said the chair of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, who serves as pastor of the Family Life Center in nearby Garden City, estimates only about 35% of early voters in Chatham County were black as of 2 days ago. Boy, they're not turning out, ladies and gentlemen. They said a little over 50% were white. That's concerning because they said we're in a city that's predominantly African American. And see, on Sunday at Savannah Civic Center, a major early voting polling location, Gillard said he saw about 800 people show up to vote.
That's why they try.
You see, I thought that was down a lot because
That's why they try.
you see, I thought that was down a lot because this is Sunday and this is a major place. See, we should have had probably had about 2,000.
No rolling.
Of course, early voting is an ends at the close of business Friday. As Gillard and Beverly said, it's clear to them that more Republicans have answered Trump's call for his supporters to participate in early voting. And I say the latest early voting totals are pretty outstanding, but it seems Republicans are taking advantage of early voting more than before. Now, as we continue to kind of look at this, we're not go through we went through most of it. But here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the thing. She
can't beat the trash man, Trump.
Vice President Kamala Harris, it's not looking good for you at all. It's not looking good. Now you see why these strategists are saying, man, we thinking she may lose. Now do y'all see why people think that she may lose now? Because I'm seeing more black people vote for Trump. Cornel West, I've seen people vote for him. Jill Stein, and the couch. That is the candidates that's against Harris. Couch, Trump, Stein, Cornel West, some states, Robert Kennedy. Okay. And all the fanfare of the Democrats, all the celebrities, Beyonce. I mean, you brought everything you could bring out, right? You brought out Obama, you brought out Michelle, you brought out everybody you could, and people still not showing up. You did a whole concert in Atlanta with Megan Thee Stallion, and people still not showing up. She did tonight this speech. They said, talking about her closing argument and all of that. And nobody not worried about her. Because if you heard one speech from her, you didn't heard them all. What is she going to say that's so significant in that speech that you're going to say, oh, okay, man, yeah. She repeating the same thing. I don't know what kind of speechwriter she has, but she needs to get rid of them. Because at that stage, she should have had at least about 3 or 4 speechwriters. I don't know. But she said everywhere she goes, she's talking the same speech. And she's not saying nothing new. She's vague on everything. How she don't stand on business on the things she should stand on business on, except abortion. But she's in trouble. And this is not a good look for her. Well, when people not showing up to early voting, especially when they say that in Georgia, more black people show up to early voting than they do on election day. Yeah. She may lose the state of Georgia, and she can't afford to lose the state of Georgia. No. She can't afford that. But let's see what happens as we continue to go along, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see what happens. But yes, Vice President Harris is in trouble. She's in trouble. Democrats are panicking, and they're worried about down ballot races too. They're panicking all across the board. And will this be a referendum on the Democrat Party? Will it be that? We'll see. We'll keep.
Listen, this election is a hot ghetto mess. Trump was at a rally a couple of days ago commenting on Kamala's major endorsement by Beyonce in Houston.
I'm not here as a celebrity. I'm not here as a politician. I'm here as a mother.
They got Beyonce. So Beyonce went up, spoke for a couple of minutes, and then left, and the place went crazy. They booed the hell out of everybody. Nobody's in charge. Joe Biden is asleep. Kamala is at a dance party with Beyonce. Joe Biden is asleep. Kamala is at a dance party with Beyonce. Beyonce. Dance party with Beyonce. Dance party with Beyonce. Dance party with Beyonce. Dance party with Beyonce. Beyonce. Party with Beyonce.
I see a lot of different people doing this. Old people, young people, white people, black people, every race. And it's really like the trolling political Not Like Us. An Indian woman cosplaying as a Black American woman, and outside of Asian, her background is Irish and Jewish, not to mention all the years she spent growing up in Canada. Who thought that just days before the election, this Beyonce-Trump mix would come out and take over TikTok? Who knew?
Beyonce, Beyonce, Beyonce. Dance party with Beyonce. Dance party with Beyonce. Dance party with Beyonce. Dance party with Beyonce. Beyonce, 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 Beyonce. Party with Beyonce. Beyonce.
Listen, this was absolutely crazy. Even the DJ at a music festival in Atlanta, One Music Fest, they played this at the festival, and it was all organic because Trump's team, they don't have any connection to One Music Fest.
Dance party with Beyonce. Come on. Dance party with Beyonce.
Come on, man.
Beyonce.
Come on, man.
Beyonce. Beyonce.
There's an icon, man.
No, you did. Beyonce.
Every time Trump opens his mouth, a new beat is being made. I don't know what it is about Trump. Every time they make a beat out of something he says, this latest one, I ain't gonna lie, the beat is fire. The beat is fire. He's like, Joe Biden is sleeping and Kamala is out with Beyonce. Beyonce.
Is it a dance party with Beyonce? Beyonce. 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 Dance party with Beyonce. Dance party with Beyonce.
Oh my goodness. And they made a cold ass beat out of this, man. This beat is dope. Beyonce, Beyonce, Beyonce. God dang.
The trash man.
They gotta keep doing this. I don't know. I tried to be mad at Trump, but this one was hilarious and funny as.
I'm telling you, it's a hot mess. It's like watching the finals. First, Kamala came out and got her moment with Beyonce. Got Beyonce fans excited about a free performance. Then that night, Kamala was booed because Beyonce didn't perform. And the crazy part about that one is how Beyonce showed up for Kamala, but still ended up benefiting Trump with his Beyonce remix. Then the same night Beyonce joined Kamala on stage, Trump, he went on Joe Rogan and got like 1 million views in the first hour. Kamala went on Club Shay Shay, and it took her 2 or 3 days to get 1 million views. The Joe Rogan collaboration hit 1 million in the first hour and over 40 million in 2 days. It was really no comparison. Then Trump had a packed out Madison Square Garden rally, and you know that's big in New York City. But Kamala's team, they got a good one after that comedian made jokes about Puerto Rico. The mainstream media was able to write off that for a day, and they thought that would be good for Kamala at least until the election. But no. That old pesky geriatric Joe, you know, the thorn in Pelosi and Kamala's side, he decided to go live while Kamala was delivering her DC speech on the lawn of the White House.
Donald Trump has no character. He doesn't give a damn about the Latino community. And just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out.
That's why the dude had to step back. He talking about the Puerto Rico in his home state of Delaware. Boy, you ain't no Puerto Rico in your home state. He meant the Puerto Ricans, but he can't even talk straight.
There's his supporters. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable.
Interrupt you for a moment. Stand by for a moment. Trump is answering some questions from reporters.
Joe Biden to make that statement, it's really a disgrace.
Wait a damn minute. Wait a damn.
How do you like my garbage truck? This truck is in honor of Kamala and Joe Biden. Joe Biden should be ashamed of himself if he knows what he's even doing. And she should be ashamed because she shouldn't let him do it. She's the vice president, but I assume she's acting as the president. She should never have let that happen. I hope you enjoyed this garbage truck.
Yeah, I know they running the story right now. I'm not gonna run the story because it's salacious gossip. But they say that in 2015, right before he was finna run for president, him and the black lady that be on TV, she from Dallas, Tamara Hall, her right there, that they was having an affair. They say Tamara Hall was having an affair with Donald Trump, and that she had a boy. This is stuff is just crazy, y'all.
The election is so ghetto. Did y'all see Trump in the garbage truck? Did y'all? When this election gonna be over? That's why I love him. Because he is a fool. I know y'all seen it, but I had to post it.
We're following breaking news on dueling Kamala Harris and Donald Trump events in Wisconsin tonight, with the election now less than a week away. CNN's new battleground state polls show the vice president has the same advantage over Trump in Wisconsin that she had back in August. Her lead in Michigan also holding steady. And in Pennsylvania, our new poll shows Harris and Trump are tied, just as they were this summer. Let's get back to our political experts for some serious analysis. David Axelrod, the margins in these states are essentially the same as they were back in August. But now, look at this, just 6% of Wisconsin voters say they're movable. 7% of Michigan voters, 8% of Pennsylvania voters say they're movable. How does the Harris campaign expand its margins with this relatively small sliver of voters?
Well, look, I think part of what she was trying to do last night was make an argument that might attract those voters. And the idea is to link some of these character issues of Trump, this fixation on his enemies and on settling scores and on vengeance, and assign a cost to it in terms of the ability to work with others to get things done and to actually address the problems that are touching people's lives. That was part of what she was trying to communicate last night, what I think she'll continue to communicate. But Wolf, at this point, this is also a ground war. These races are very close. The margins in these polls in Michigan and Wisconsin are a little bit larger than some of the other polls that are out there and some of the other polls I've seen. I think these are all very, very close races, and they're going to be determined by organizational efforts and who comes out to vote in these states.
Early voting numbers show with just days to go before early voting ends, black voters are not voting as much as they have in previous years. In fact, there's been a steady decline, according to the research, since 2012, something that black voters groups have been working to address. While early voting is breaking records, a closer look at the numbers shows there are also some new success stories in certain voting groups. Then there are others that, for whatever reason, are not. And at the moment, it is a concern.
We're trying to do everything we can, from door knocking.
Come on, man. The Democrats are not turning out the black vote. The Greek freak failed. The boule, shame on them. This lady right here, she got paid big money to go to them churches and tell people to come get their barbecue plate at the park and vote. I done seen it a million times. Take the people straight. And that's disgusting. No voting on Sunday, goddammit. That's it. They taking people straight out the church. Like y'all ain't never seen that shit before. That's disgusting. See, I'm the wrong person. I grew up seeing this shit. Now I'm gonna write a tell-all book. But they taking people straight out the church to go vote for the Democrats. Well, it ain't working now. Black people not enthusiastic about voting for the Democrats. Shame on them. Lying, Roland Martin, about the swell of the. Remember they said this was Barack Obama type energy. What happened to all that energy?
From phone banking, from church talking and neighborhood knocking to get the black vote out.
Colette Forrest is co-founder of the nonpartisan Charlotte Black Voter Project. Its members, along with...
Why you going to the church, ma'am, and you got abortion on the table? You trying to transition kids? They got to have that talk. I'm having it. Y'all not having it with these people. Yeah, you going to the church for, ma'am? You don't give a damn about the Lord no more. You got a new religion. You see, you could be anything you want. You could be a man one day, you could be a woman the next day. It's up to you. What the hell are you going to church?
The NAACP and the Charlotte Black Political Caucus, they've been working to address it and to figure it out. Forrest tells us there is dissatisfaction with both Republicans and Democrats, though she's quick to say that it is not an excuse.
We are trying to say, we get it. You've been let down. No, however, you are not going to let your children down by not voting.
And that's where the concern lies. Numbers from the John Locke Foundation show early voting numbers for blacks are a little more than half of...
We get it. We get it. See, the Democrats said to tell black people that's his business. They get it. But never to promise you nothing. Make that. We already heard about that. Make you no promises, give you no guarantees. But it's cool to say we get it. I understand. You've been forgotten, but you're not gonna get nothing.
Half of what they were in 2020, and with just days to go, it's a lot to make up. At the same time, Hispanics and Asian Americans are seeing higher numbers in their respective groups. Some of those early voting totals, in fact, beating those from 2020.
Well, those other groups are up. The Asians,
Why
the
we haven't
Hispanics.
heard nothing about no Asians? That's another thing. Why is the Asians trying to lay low in this damn election? Nah, hell no. That's the first time I heard Asian. They gotta get only whites and black and Mexicans in this country. I'm trying to tell you something real sinister going on here. Why are they bringing up the Asians? Now, Kamala is Asian. She's Indian. What the hell y'all think of that? She's Asian. And she was claiming to be an Asian American senator at one goddamn time. Why are they not bringing up the Asians? Why they not pressuring the Asians, asking the Asians who the hell they gonna vote for? Because they don't want to talk to the Asians. Because then Asians might start saying, well, I'm happy that was the first Asian president we might have.
Hispanics, because they've been rushed into this country under Biden and Harris. But as I reported before, even these people are turning their backs on the Democrats. At the end of the day, it is what it is. This week, you can say Kamala, Biden, and Trump had the garbage wars. First, the outrage was for Trump. Then it flipped on Kamala and Biden as Kamala, the curry queen, distanced herself from Joe Biden. And Trump supporters seem to be leaning into those garbage statements, saying if they're trash, then Trump is a garbage man and he's going to clean up America. It's like every single play designed for Trump to end up on defense. Somehow he still ends up with the ball. But let's go ahead and get the conversation started. Will Kamala get enough support in the battleground states over the next few days in order to win the election? Or is it over for her? Let me know what you think below. Special
Salute.
All right, guys, happy Wednesday. I'm so sorry I'm late today. I feel like I always have to issue a statement that I'm not dead. Everyone's very worried about me. If I'm even 5 minutes late, I get a text message like, did they get you? Did they get you? Who is they? Well, I think we all know. If I do end up dead, you guys will be the first people to know who did decide to do the thing, because, probably the same people that killed MLK, JFK. I don't know. I'm just saying stuff. We're talking a lot about the feds and the CIA. I may piss off the wrong people. Certainly by taking a closer look at Kamala's genealogy. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing today, taking a closer look at Grandma Krishy, because
everybody who on social media, content creators who are now in our community heavily going in on Kamala is using this work Candace Owens did and proving that Kamala has done lied about her identity and there's no black anywhere. All that daddy Jamaican, all that nonsense, we done found out what's really going on. She's really Jewish. That's what she is. That's what she is. She's really Jewish. That's the big scandal. That is a Jewish lady. If it had a first Jewish president in there, why don't they say that? Because that's what she is. But all that black, that's an absolute finesse. And anybody who say that type of BS should be ashamed of themselves. And people who steady parrot that, they got to take a second look at them to see what was they really trying to do. We got a lot of COINTEL running around here, knowingly or unknowingly.
Math is simply not mathing. I'm driving myself insane. So I want to welcome you guys into all that we have uncovered about her so that you can help me. Also, there seems to be another big secret here that I can't quite figure out. Later on in the show, though, we're going to discuss Jeff Bezos because he wrote an op-ed to the Washington Post, which he owns, and it's pretty impactful. Basically, he says in so many words, everyone hates us, we suck, and we have to stop being so fake and gay. And I can co-sign that. So we'll discuss it. But first, I am feeling really upset at Shannon Sharpe today. Yeah, the former NFL player who hosts a podcast called Club Shay Shay, after his interview with Kamala Harris, because, you know, he just didn't push her on some things that he decided to make fun of me about in the past. And yeah, we're going to get into that. Welcome back to Candace. All right, before we dive back into Kamala's genealogy, I do want to honorably mention Shannon Sharpe. And by honorably, I don't actually mean honorably, because I'm just so sick and tired of this weird double standard that seems to exist in Black media, where they really throughout my entire career have rejected me, not wanted to have me on. She's not Black, Candace ain't Black. But then suddenly you have a candidate, a presidential candidate, who quite literally put on political blackface. We bust her in all of these lies, and nobody keeps that same energy. Like, what kind of Blackness are they actually guarding? Is it Blackness or is it just the Democratic Party? That's what I'm beginning to wonder. So I want to show you, when I got fired earlier this year from the Daily Wire, there were so many Black hosts who were just like dancing on my grave, like thinking that I wouldn't be successful ever again, and making up all of these conspiracy theories. And one of them was that I somehow knew I was leaving the Daily Wire. I didn't. And that was the reason I had just done Joe Budden's podcast. Like, Joe Budden randomly shouted me out on his podcast. I instantly responded and he had me on. There was no move there. There was nothing being planned. And then the same thing with the Breakfast Club. Like, I would have loved to do that show for years and never invited me. They just happened to invite me after I did the Joe Budden podcast. So I did 2 in a row, and then I leave the Daily Wire. And the next thing you know, they're trying to drum up some conspiracy about me, like trying to Blackify myself, as if I have to do that. Spoiler alert, I'm already Black. I've been Black every single day of my life. I have not even taken a 10-minute recess. I have not been like, let me just chill for like 5 minutes and not be Black for a second. So it's so ridiculous and never warrants a response. But it does today, because I wanted you to compare and contrast Shay Shay's attitude when he addresses Blackness, when speaking about an actual Black person, and then when speaking to a person who's just wearing blackface. So here he is. Let's jog your memories about what Shannon Sharpe had to say about me following my exit from the Daily Wire. Take a listen.
Sometimes, and it's happened before, people in our community forget that they're Black. And they try to appease a group of people that's probably never going to embrace them. And once they realize that, guess who's the first group to take them back?
I don't know her.
You know, I ain't say nobody's name, Amanda.
I literally don't know her.
You don't even know who I'm talking about.
I don't know.
How you know who I'm talking about? But we've seen this happen before. Rest his soul, O.J. Simpson. You know, he had the famous quote, "I'm O.J., I ain't Black." Even Michael Jackson went through what he went through, rest his soul.
Right.
Even Kanye had to be reminded. And now Miss Owens, I don't want no Black pilots, I don't want this, I don't want that. And now we can't keep off our Black media stations. When before she gave us her butt to kiss. Now, if I'm lying, if I'm speaking out of turn, people, y'all correct me. But y'all know I'm telling the truth.
No, you are literally not telling the truth. Nothing you are saying makes any sense. Again, every time I've been invited to go on a Black podcast, I've gone on it. But it's because of people who have your attitude and decided that people that are conservative just don't deserve a platform that I don't typically get invited. Like, it happened totally organically, did not happen, had nothing to do. It happened before I left the Daily Wire. And like I said, you were dancing on my grave. And by the way, to the woman who said, I don't know her, I literally have no idea who you are. I don't know your name. I should have looked it up. That would have been the correct amount of journalism to do here, but it doesn't matter, because I'm focusing here on Shannon Sharpe and this sort of attitude when a Black person doesn't tap dance for the Democratic Party. So let's fast forward to this week or past couple of days, when he has on Kamala Harris, the entire community, the Black community, is up in arms, recognizing that she literally plagiarized her grandparents to pretend that she was Black, when in fact she's Irish, Syrian, Jewish, and Indian. That is her correct genealogy. And so he has an opportunity to be the hero, since you are the person that is deciding who is and is not Black, and when they're allowed to be Black and how they're allowed to be Black, and, you know, the reason that they're acting Black, whatever you're saying there, which makes absolutely no sense. You would think he would have taken the opportunity to address Kamala Harris's genealogy, her ancestry, who actually in your family is Black. Instead, he gives her a platform. Listen to Kamala Harris here, because like I said, she's kind of doing the slow wipe here, trying to pretend like she never said she was Black, never said she was African American. And she provides an excuse for how she's not really Black, but is Black on the basis of her mother's definition of community. I know that sounds crazy because it is. Take a listen.
My mother, she understood that there is a community that she wanted her children to be raised in. Mm-hmm. And she was very intentional and purposeful about that. And so I always say to people, even when I took the stage as the nominee for the Democratic nomination, that, you know, there is the family that you have by birth.
Okay.
And there is also the family you have by love.
No.
And they're equally family.
Yes.
Right.
No.
And I learned that from my mother.
No.
So my mother, I had all these aunties and uncles. My Uncle Sherman, who was one of the first Black men to graduate from Berkeley School of Law, who, when we were young girls, sat us down and taught us how to play chess, because Uncle Sherman said, you need to understand how the chessboard works, because that's the way the world works. There are going to be different players with different moves, and you need to see the whole board. My mother raised us around, like my Auntie Chris, who went to Howard in the 50s and pledged Alpha Kappa Alpha. And she was one of my incredible role models growing up. And that was one of the big reasons I wanted to go to Howard University and pledge Alpha Kappa Alpha. Those are some of the lessons that I've learned from my mother. And I try to also share with people.
I mean, just look at him. How does that not register to Black America as an absolute fraud? Like, where is that same energy? He's like, yeah, that makes total sense. When, you know, and it's not your family, but it is your family. He's like, yeah. Yeah, just lapping it up and accepting whatever she says. Why? Because he doesn't have an original thought in his brain, and it's been mandated to him that the definition of Blackness is basically enslaving yourself to the Democratic Party, even when you have someone who is quite literally wearing blackface. And for clarity, in case you are just jumping into this series, every single person that she just named there, her Auntie Chris, her Uncle Fred, her Aunt whatever, Shelly, none of those are her actual aunts and uncles. She admitted that in her book, if you read the fine print, that they weren't her actual aunts and uncles. But that's her experience with the Black community. And she's essentially saying to Shannon Sharpe, yeah, I'm going to keep blackfacing this because my mom told me it's cool. And these are my aunties and these are my uncles. And that's that. That's just how family works, except that's literally not how family works. And so I just want to say, Shannon Sharpe, if you're watching this, and I'm sure someone will cut it so you can see it, you're a disgrace for that. You really are a disgrace for your treatment of somebody who's actually Black when weighed against your treatment of somebody who has been wearing political blackface simply because she wants votes from people that she perceives as stupid. And by the way, you are playing the part there, Shannon Sharpe, of being an idiot. Yeah. Oh, I was talking about Candace Owens. By the way, shout out to the people when he was disrespecting me. If you go to those comments, him and the woman he's sitting across from, everybody came down on him and were just like, no. Just because she does not agree and go with the crowd, you don't get to disrespect her and say that she's somehow putting on like I don't speak to Black people. Absolutely ridiculous. But I had to vent about that because when I saw that clip, I was like, I know he's not really out here doing that. And yes, he actually is. So Club Shay Shay, you are Club Nay Nay in my book. You absolutely, you suck for that. But I will say to you, because I'm always open to having a conversation, I will have a conversation with you. You've never invited me. How could a person who never invited me onto their show make that statement? Is it not just absolutely ridiculous? Anyways, moving on, because I do want to jump back into her actual genealogy, not her aunties and uncles that aren't aunts and uncles and Club Shay Shay, but like the actual uncles and aunts who she never mentioned, who are very white or very Jewish. And I have just been completely confused about this Miss Christie. We've talked about her in the past, but I really want to hone in on her because I'm telling you, I was just on a spiral today going, okay, nothing is making sense. Okay, so just to remind you, obviously, Christie is the person who was the biggest inspiration in Donald Harris's life. Instantly a red flag, spoke to a relative of his. I told you that back when I spoke to one of Donald Harris's half siblings, and they said that they had never met Miss Christie, who would be their grandmother. So you got one sibling who's like unbelievably close and being raised by, and the other sibling, same grandparent, and never heard of them, doesn't have a picture in the house, and realize that is actually remarkably suspicious if they don't actually know their own grandparent. And so I decided to look for clues in his essay, and just reminding you, he told us that his roots go back to Miss Christie, that she was formerly Christiana Brown, so presumably she got married, and he says right out, is honest about the fact that she is a descendant of Hamilton Brown, who is on record as a plantation and slave owner and the founder of Brownstown. He was a nasty piece of work, extraordinarily racist, whipped the crap out of his slaves, and fought so that slavery would never end. He did not want the abolishment of slavery, and he went to England to fight it at every regard. He was known to be particularly vicious and abusive. What's really interesting is that Snopes was trying, when people started realizing that she descended from slaves, and yet she's walking around talking about her being African American, Snopes tried to write a piece in defense of Kamala Harris that actually further substantiates that Christiana Brown, in my view, doesn't actually exist, or at least that's not her name. So they wrote this in 2019. The title here is, Did U.S. Senator Kamala Harris's ancestor own slaves in Jamaica? And directly from that piece, they write, we have not yet found a record of a Christiana Brown being born to Mary Melvina Brown. Such a record would establish a link between Donald Harris's paternal grandmother, Christiana, and the Antrim slave owner, Hamilton Brown. As a result of this absence, we are issuing a rating of unproven until such evidence emerges. So they're basically saying we can't find who she was born of. He's telling us, they're basically saying Donald Harris is a liar. Like, we can't find the record, so we're saying that it's unproven. And for whatever reason, I guess he would want the street cred of saying that his relatives, his ancestors were slave owners. No, obviously not. He's obviously telling the truth. This woman, who knows what her name is clearly descended from Hamilton Brown. And yet when we did this chart, so I want you to take a look at this. When we did this chart, first and foremost, I just want to let you know, there is incest guaranteed. There's no question that Hamilton Brown was both Mary Melvina's father and the person that she married. It's very strange. She either married her brother, who might have been Hamilton Brown Jr., or she married her father. That part's unclear, but there is definitively incest. Everybody has pointed that out in emails, and I'm not going to make a big whatever about it, because it's just like, okay, we're talking about the 1800s, and I don't think it's really going to make or break people voting for her. It really doesn't have anything to do with her, but there's incest, no question. And what they're basically pointing out, Snopes, is that she's allegedly supposed to be the child of Mary Melvina Brown, but they can't find that in a record. Instead, someone seems to have produced a fake birth record saying that, well, her mom's name is Mary Ann Brown, but that would not make her a descendant of Hamilton Brown. So that's problematic. If she's got a mom named Mary, it's got to be this Mary Melvina Brown. And every time we tried to look and piece her in, and this is supposed to be, again, Donald's grandmother, we cannot find this woman anywhere. So I said, you know what, let's pull that chart back up. I said, let's take a look at the actual confirmed descendants of Hamilton Brown, like the people who we can find their tombstones, some of them literally say, like, the son of Hamilton Brown, like, it's very clear. You find their obituaries. You, again, also suspect that we have all of these people that we can find obituaries and tombstones for, but we can't find anything about Miss Christie, who was just this huge influence on Donald's life. Like, who is this grandma? Is he pulling the Kamala? Is he like, hey, if you feel a connection and an affinity, you could just be like, that's my grandma. That's my grandma. Which is just wild, by the way. Quick pause. Like, what are we even talking about? Like, I had close family friends. I actually was really close with a woman named Bernadette, who was like a second mom to me. Can I now run as an Irish president of the United States? This is wild. This is crazy talk. Of course you can't. So we took a look at those relevant relatives who had tombstones and had obituaries. And I said, actually, in the Kingston Gleaner, they always tell you who attended the funeral. And it's interesting because we keep seeing Oscar Brown Harris as a pallbearer. He would have been like 30 years old. And we still can't find Christiana Brown anywhere. So I'm going to show you Edwin Brown's obituary because there's a couple of things that are super interesting about it. This is his obituary. I want to say he died September 15th. Maybe it's like 1939. I have it written down somewhere. I don't have it here. But it tells you who is at his funeral. You can see up there who the pallbearers are. It tells you that you have the Misters C. Brown and D.A. Brown. Those are the brothers of the deceased. That all checks out. Stanley Brown and Oscar Brown, which are listed as cousins, which would imply that Mary Melvina had a sister, or Hamilton Brown had a third sister. It was totally incestuous, and they birthed Oscar Brown. That is very strange that he's being mentioned as a cousin when he should be mentioned as a nephew. And I do think that family line had a lot of incest, and that could be the secret. But if you keep looking at that obituary, what's also interesting is when you look down, there is a mention, I believe it is in this one, of look at the bottom there, a couple of lines up. It says Christiana Rose. Okay, so we were interested in that. And also next to Christiana Rose is Beryl Harker. Let's just remember that Beryl is the Grandma Beryl. We're looking for Grandma Beryl. So I said, okay, let's take a look. Could this be Miss Chrissy? Could this be the Beryl that we're looking for? And it's like a dead end. It's like a total dead end. When I look up Christiana Rose, it is very apparent that she owned land. So that would check out, because the woman that we're looking for, far from this depiction that she's potentially just some mixed person and Hamilton Brown raped a slave, which I felt like they were trying to make us think. She obviously was legitimate, okay? Because Oscar Brown is attending these funerals. You don't just rape a slave and then invite the product of that child to be the pallbearer. And beyond that, we know that she owned dry goods stores. She was engaged in politics. This is not some illegitimate child. Christiana, in the way that he describes her in her piece, was a descendant of Hamilton Brown, not an illegitimate person, and she owned land. So when we found Christiana Rose, I started thinking maybe they just made up the name Christiana, full stop, made up a name Christiana, showed a picture of this woman to make people think that, Kamala potentially is mixed somewhere along the line. I am fully of the belief that the photos that have been shown of the grandparents are completely faked. Not faked as in the photo of the individuals are fake, but that they are not the people that they purport them to be, that Kamala is just adopting people. Maybe that woman was like a grandma, but that's not her real grandma. So is Christiana Rose her real grandma? We don't know, because then we can find virtually nothing about Christiana Rose other than the fact that she received property from her father, who seems to be one of the original people in St. Anne as well. Also of interest, and this could be a potential lead, is that same Edwin Brown obituary that we're looking at. His tombstone says son of Hamilton Brown, and it also says of Pedro Farm. And that's the first time that I had recognized that, of Pedro Farm. It allows us to put at least some coordinates on the map, and we're continuing to research and say, okay, well, if we're looking for a family that was running Pedro Farm, we should be able to find some names. We should be able to find some names within the Kingston Gleaner. So we found that today. So we're just now exploring that lead. The other possibility is if they made up this name, there's got to be a reason they made up the name, right? And I never felt that woman was married to Joseph Alexander Harris. Joseph Alexander Harris, we know he's a Syrian Jew. He looks exceptionally sharp and dressed in his photo, like his father looked and his father's father looked. And it just didn't feel like the right vibe. Well, something that was of interest is I was like, let me look up in the Kingston Gleaner and see everything that I can find about Joseph Alexander, because maybe they're just hiding who he actually married. Maybe that's the big secret. Maybe it's a big incest secret. Maybe Oscar Harris is the product of incest, because, he went by Oscar Brown Harris. Maybe two siblings got together, and what you really have is that he is just the product of a mom and dad that are also sister and brother. Maybe. So I started crawling through the Kingston Gleaner, looking to see what I could find about Joseph Alexander. Again, Joseph Alexander is supposed to be the person that had a child with Miss Chrissy, and that child is supposed to be Oscar Joseph. And what we did uncover was this entry. It's a notice. Now, this is going to look strange to you, so I'll just tell you, because the first time I saw it, I thought it was weird. But if you had a wife or a spouse that left you, you had to publicly post it in the newspaper, so that you would not be deemed responsible for their debts if anything were to happen. And this person, who is Joseph Alexander Harris, writes, my wife, Caroline, or published rather, my wife, Caroline Verolita Harris, having left my home, care, and protection without my knowledge, I hereby warn the public that I will not be responsible for any debts that she may contract. Signed, Joseph Alexander Harris, on June 27th of 1934. Now, that could be a different Joseph Alexander Harris. We did find another potential Joseph Alexander Harris, but we haven't been able to verify that these are not just completely fake records, because every person that's listed in that family tree doesn't have a tombstone. It's like someone just made birth records. And as I've learned from Donald Harris's family, that's very easy in Jamaica, especially for them. It was easy because they were establishing the town. But then he said, even later on, him growing up, all you had to do was go down and bribe someone, know somebody down at the office and be like, hey, can you make this? And they could make that stuff on the spot. So finding a birth record is not convincing for me. And that was actually rightly pointed out by Snopes, that the birth record that exists for Christiana doesn't make any sense. There's no father listed, and there's a Mary Ann Brown that doesn't actually exist, and it has to be Mary Malvina Brown, but we can't find a birth record from Mary Malvina Brown having birthed Christiana. So birth records in Jamaica at this time and way forward into the future are just not reliable. They're not reliable. And so, but what I feel is reliable are tombstones. It's a little harder to fake that to bury someone. I'm not saying you can't, you certainly can, but we could not establish, it almost seemed like someone created another Joseph Alexander Harris. And we don't know if that's the right person, if this could be the person that they're hiding, someone that he did marry, or if that's a different family tree. That's where we're at. Christiana is driving me absolutely insane. And so I wanted to open up to the public about it, because what ends up happening is when I get stuck on something, then one of you guys emails me and it's like, poof, a breakthrough. And so I was like, why am I driving myself crazy? I'm going to use the internet and the people that have been following me on the series who are going to now dig like me. We're going to become, especially women, like the CIA, and we're going to pull something up. But I'm telling you, just in closing, that if this is a thing going forward, that you can just say that you have some friends and you are that somehow like family, and then you can just like take on that race. I am definitively running as the first Japanese dictator of the United States. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. I hope you guys vote for me, because I do want to be the dictator of the United States. I feel like I could dictate some things that would make society a little bit better. All right, guys, the media has dubbed this the abortion election. We have to stand up to this evil. When you join forces with Preborn, the largest pro-life organization in the nation, you are protecting the greatest victims in our society, of course, babies in their mother's wombs. Preborn's network of clinics are positioned in the highest abortion areas in the nation, and they have rescued over 300,000 babies. When a woman considering an abortion searches to end her baby's life, Preborn is there. Preborn gives these women in need a free ultrasound, because the power of hearing a heartbeat on the ultrasound combined with God's love doubles a baby's chance at life. One ultrasound costs just $28, and up to 5 are $140. Any gift will help their cause, and all gifts are tax deductible. To donate securely, you just dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. Again, that is pound 250 baby, or you can head to preborn.com/Candace. Again, that's preborn.com/Candace. All right. Jeff Bezos wrote a thing, and it's kind of interesting. So in case you're not following this, it's hilarious. I actually think it's weird that you have editorial boards that give presidential endorsements, because the whole idea that they're supposed to be selling to us is that they're neutral. And so when they just go, I endorse this president, and it's the most predictable president given the publication, you're like, okay, this is why I don't listen to anything you say or believe anything that you write, because it's very obvious that you are incredibly biased in all of your pieces. So Jeff Bezos, they had run it up, I guess, the top editor or whatever, ran it up the chain and said, Jeff Bezos, we're endorsing Kamala Harris. And Jeff Bezos said, no, we're just done with endorsements. We're not endorsing anybody. And they panicked. It turned into toddlers in tiaras. The Washington Post, they broke down. These adults had mental breakdowns. They said, no, what are you saying? Are you saying we have to be objective? Are you saying that we're supposed to be objective journalists? We don't do that anymore at the Washington Post. And it's not a joke. 3 of the Washington Post's 10-person editorial board announced that they were stepping down after Jeff Bezos blocked the endorsement of Kamala Harris. Like, I can't even... It's funny. It's genuinely funny. We should laugh. It's they don't appreciate the irony of that. Like, yes, that is the problem. The fact that you are quitting your job, like you're saying, if we have to be fair, I'm quitting my job. It's like, okay. And that's what they did. They quit their job. You have people who had been at the paper for more than 4 decades, like David Hoffman. He just stepped down. Molly Roberts, Millie Mitra. They were just like, I can't handle this. I have to be biased. And also the editor at large, a guy named Robert Kagan, also resigned in protest. And apparently a bunch of people said, we're unsubscribing. We're unsubscribing to the Washington Post. This is a huge mistake. And they wrote a statement saying that the refusal to endorse a presidential candidate is a mistake. I can't believe that they can't appreciate that they have just become cartoons. Like, you are a Will Ferrell skit waiting to happen. I mean, Saturday Night Live should make that a skit. If they want to be funny again, they should make it a skit. Like when they got challenged to do their jobs, be unbiased, they just lost it. They just completely lost their ish and said, I'm out of here. That's not what I'm here for. And I love that honesty. Anyways, what I wanted to point out to you was that Jeff Bezos, that is, ended up writing a piece basically saying why he asks them to do their jobs and not be unbiased. And it's entitled "The Hard Truth: Americans Don't Trust the News Media." Of course, everybody knows that. It's at an all-time low. What is it, like 30% of people actually trust the mainstream media? And I would say that those 30% might be suffering from like a mental illness. Truly, we have found the dumbest people on our side. Like, if you were like, I really trust the mainstream media, and you're part of that 30%, you really have to just re-examine your life after the last few years. I'm going to read you a couple of portions from what he wrote. I just highlighted it because I didn't want to read the entire thing, but he writes that most people believe the media is biased. Anyone who doesn't see this is paying scant attention to reality, and those who fight reality lose. Reality is an undefeated champion. It would be easy to blame others for our long and continuing fall in credibility, and therefore our decline in impact. But a victim mentality will not help. Complaining is not a strategy. We must work harder to control what we can control to increase our credibility. Presidential endorsements do nothing to tip the scales of an election. No undecided voters in Pennsylvania are going to say, quote, I'm going with newspaper A's endorsement. None. What presidential endorsements actually do is create a perception of bias, a perception of non-independence. Ending them is a principled decision, and it's the right one. Of course, that is correct. What do you think people believe when you say that you're coming together to endorse a presidential candidate, especially one as ridiculous as Kamala Harris, who didn't even earn the vote? She just was kind of waiting for Joe Biden to die at the right time. And then they were like, here you go. Now you're the candidate. Nobody voted for her. That's just crazy to think that she's like trying to occupy the highest office in the land, and no one voted for this woman. And they're like, we're endorsing the woman that nobody voted for. And they can't figure out in their own heads why that's bad. He goes on to write, in the annual public surveys about trust and reputation, journalists and the media have regularly fallen near the very bottom, often just above Congress. But in this year's Gallup poll, we have managed to fall below Congress. Our profession is now the least trusted of all. Something we are doing is clearly not working. Lack of credibility isn't unique to the Post. Our brethren newspapers have the same issue, and it's a problem not only for media, but also for the nation. Many people are turning to off-the-cuff podcasts. Hey. Inaccurate social media posts and other unverified news sources, which can quickly spread misinformation and deepen divisions. The Washington Post and the New York Times win prizes, but increasingly, we talk only to a certain elite. More and more, we talk to ourselves. Oh my gosh, this is something that I have noticed. And there is a great example of that this year, because if the media had any impact at all, the amount of hit pieces that were written about me, it's unbelievable. Actually, I'm going to have to go back and count them one day. Basically, like, she's done, she's crazy, she's over. You had like Barry Weiss writing newsletters for weeks. And it's like, guys, who are you writing this to? You're just writing it to yourselves. You don't even care what people think anymore. You don't care. You just care about what you think, and you believe that you guys are the elites, and you sit in your circles and you're like, yes, well, we understand, and this is what we're going to do to fix the problem of people not believing us. We're going to keep smearing and libeling everybody all the time as racist and sexist and misogynist and anti-Semites. And then we're going to go, it's very weird that they're turning to independent media when we told people that independent media is racist, sexist, and misogynist. We told them. Like, it really is mind-numbing. When you take a look at them, it just seems to be a huge circle, and they're all writing to each other. They're texting each other. I know for a fact they're on text chains together, and it's ridiculous. Nobody cares anymore. We are living in a post-mainstream media world, and I love that, but Jeff Bezos does not. He writes conclusively, while I do not and will not push my personal interest, I will also not allow this paper to stay on autopilot and fade into irrelevance, overtaken by unresearched podcasts and social media barbs, not without a fight. It's too important. The stakes are too high. Listen, it's a noble attempt, Jeff. I just feel like you should have maybe done that like 10 years ago when you purchased it. That's it is genuinely too late. Like, no one, just watching them all resign really just was a confirmation to us that we just shouldn't listen to you guys anymore. And sure, if you're saying he's trying to get more conservative people to write articles, it's a noble endeavor. I will pay attention to it. But the reality is people prefer independent podcasts for a reason. It's because at least they know that we're willing to ask the questions. Hey, if you guys want a little bit of street cred, maybe instead of constantly trying to debunk everything that independent researchers are saying and podcasters are saying, why don't you dive in? Why don't you actually dive in? Like, this is a pretty big story. It's millions and millions of views on Kamala's genealogy, and we've caught her red-handed in some lies and verified it with her own family members, and no one wants to cover it in your newspaper. Why? In fact, I should have pulled this up. Somebody forwarded me the snootiest. It was some guy named Tom who writes for the New York Times, and he politely wrote Tom and was like, "Hey, Tom, why aren't you doing anything on Candace's reporting?" And he wrote back the most astounding, snooty, elitist, out of touch email I've ever read in my life, basically saying to him, like, I don't have to listen to Candace. I write for the New York Times, blah, blah, blah. She's an idiot. And I was like, and that is why you guys are all fading into irrelevancy, because you just think you're better than everybody else and keep proving that you're absolutely not better than everybody else. So anyways, I thought that was a really good piece written by him. And we'll see. We'll see if it has any impact. By the way, do you think you guys know who's going to win the presidential election or how many seats the Democrats or Republicans will win in the House or Senate? Well, there's a legal financial exchange that lets you trade or bet on the outcome of these elections. It's called Kalshi. Kalshi went to court against the Biden administration, and they won legal approval for election betting for the first time in over 100 years. They have markets on who will win the presidential election, who will control the House and Senate, and who will win swing states and more. Kalshi is already being used by hundreds of thousands of people and has facilitated over $1 billion worth of trades. And what's cool about the platform is that you can trade on your opinions to make money, or you can hedge your political risks. You can also check the market odds to see who is more likely to win at any given time. Right now, the odds are near 58-42. Not surprisingly, Trump is up big. The elections markets are now live to trade. They are the first regulated place where you can do this right now. When you sign up at kalshi.com/Candace, the first 500 traders who deposit $100 will get a free $20 credit. That's kalshi.com/Candace. All right, we have to cover this garbage story, literally a garbage story about Puerto Rico. And this is, listen, I don't know what to say. Nobody has a sense of humor anymore.
All right, that was Vice President Kamala Harris as she was speaking in Phoenix, Arizona. And we actually do have some breaking news related to this. Former President Donald Trump is suing CBS News for $10 billion over what he is claiming was deceitful doctoring of an interview with Harris. Now, Fox News Digital obtained the affidavit exclusively today, and I have it right here to read to you. I did want to read you a part of this. I'm also just going to pull up some of this quote here. As you can see, it says, this action concerns CBS's partisan and unlawful acts of election and voter interference through malicious, deceptive, and substantial news distortion calculated to confuse, deceive, and mislead the public, an attempt to tip the scales in favor of the Democratic Party as the heated 2024 presidential election, which President Trump is leading, that's what this says, they're claiming that, approaches its conclusion. Again, we are just getting this news in here, a Fox News Digital exclusive. Here's what we know right now. Trump attorneys said the complaint comes due to CBS's partisan and unlawful acts of election and voter interference through malicious, deceptive, and substantial news distortion calculated to confuse, deceive, and mislead the public. That was the verbiage that I just read to you, and you can see it on your screen from this lawsuit that we are reading right now. Trump attorneys are also arguing the edits were done in an effort to, quote, attempt to tip the scales in favor of the Democratic Party as the election approaches its conclusion. Now, this lawsuit comes after Trump's attorneys wrote letters to CBS News demanding the network release the full transcript of this 60 Minutes interview with Harris after it aired two different answers to the same question. Trump attorneys asked CBS to reserve all the documents and communications related to the interview pending a potential legal battle. Again, if you are just joining us here on Live Now from Fox for this breaking news, Trump is suing CBS News for $10 billion over an interview with Vice President Kamala Harris. This lawsuit, again, filed today, specifically referencing this exchange Harris had with 60 Minutes correspondent Bill Whitaker. In a preview clip that aired on Face the Nation, Harris was asked why it seemed like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't listening to the U.S. This is the quote from that. Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region. That was her response in that clip. Now, Harris is being criticized by conservatives for offering a lengthy, what they're saying, word salad, which has been used a lot with conservatives to describe some of Vice President Kamala Harris's speeches to Whitaker. But when that same question aired the following night in the primetime election special, a shorter, more focused answer from the vice president then followed. Again, if you are just joining us on Live Now from Fox for this breaking news, this Fox News Digital exclusively obtaining this lawsuit that was filed today.
This is Corey John Nawrocki. Corey, a U.S. Marine, was killed by Russia. But Corey was not killed by Russia while doing a mission in Syria, while doing a mission somewhere in Africa, Latin America, Iran. No, ladies and gentlemen, Corey, an American, was killed in Russia by Russians while doing a mission for Ukraine during their invasion of Russia. Now, if you're like me, you probably got some questions. Like, why the hell is there a U.S. Marine in a firefight during an invasion of Russia? Has U.S. Congress declared war on Russia recently? Has NATO even officially announced that they would be sending U.S. troops to fight against Russia? Or rather, invade Russia on behalf of Ukraine? Because that's what happened. Has the U.S. president even announced that there would be a surge of U.S. troops? Because he's the commander-in-chief, at least you would expect him to make a formal announcement if he's going to send U.S. troops on our behalf to potentially start World War III, because that's what he's asking for. The answer to all those questions are no. But it isn't just the U.S. that is sending their troops on behalf of Ukraine to invade Russia. During Ukraine's mission in the Bryansk region in Russia, they found equipment and weapons and paraphernalia from the U.S., from Poland, from Canada, and even found a dead Ranger with the tattoo of the 75th Ranger Battalion from the United States. In other words, NATO powers have sent troops to invade Russia, and they're hiding behind the cover of Ukraine in their conflict with Russia. NATO powers are invading Russia, which is the whole reason why Russia invaded Ukraine, because they didn't want this to happen, and they knew it would if they allowed NATO to have control over Ukraine, or for Ukraine to be a part of NATO. In other words, while Zelensky and Ukraine are playing the victims, while NATO is playing victim, in trying to blame Russia for being fearful of a Ukraine that is part of NATO, they are literally proving Russia's point as we speak, as NATO powers are sending their troops to invade Russia. It's almost as if Putin knew this was going to happen if NATO was allowed to have a foothold in Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to understand that this is a serious escalation. The United States is part of an invasion of Russia. Canada is part of an invasion of Russia. Poland, which is near Russia, is part of an invasion of Russia. And somehow the mainstream media isn't even reporting on this, despite the fact that this could potentially spark off War III. Not to mention, the U.S. is sending these troops with no official declaration of war. So just fuck our democracy, right? Fuck Congress, fuck the balance of powers. Why do we even need those? We don't need a declaration of war. We just see who we want to, when we want to, wherever we want to. And what's even crazier is the fact that Congress is actually allowing this infringement of their right and their power and their duty to declare or not declare war against a foreign adversary. It's becoming more and more clear, ladies and gentlemen, despite the fact the rest of the world wants nothing to do with the potential World War III, NATO and the U.S. specifically are trying their damnedest to make it happen. And no one's doing anything about it. But somehow I just know the U.S. is going to make the fact that a U.S. Marine was killed in Russia during an invasion of Russia, Russia's fault. And not the U.S.'s fault for sending soldiers and Marines to a place they should have never been at to begin with.
A few minutes ago, the Russian Defense Ministry officially announced that amid the plight of the Ukrainian occupation army in the Kursk region, the Ukrainian High Military Command continues its desperate attempts to attack the positions of Russian troops in the Glushkovsky district of the Kursk region. According to representatives of the Russian military department, the Ukrainian army is trying to break through Russian troops' defenses in the Glushkovsky district of the Kursk Oblast to release Ukrainian troops trapped in the Koronevsky and Sudzansky districts of this Russian region. According to the official representative of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, General Igor Konashenkov, on the morning of October 31st, Ukrainian troops made another attempt to invade the Kursk region, near the village of Novyi Put. However, the professional actions of the soldiers of the group of troops under the designation
That's why lately they've been saying North Korea is in Russia, North Korea is in Russia. Just they keep saying it like crazy people. No, it's NATO is trapped in Russia, in the Kursk region. NATO, thousands playing like they're Ukrainians. Putin been showing NATO officers killed, American Rangers killed, putting on the news. They still won't put these people on the news. But sooner or later, all this shit gonna hit the fan when all these NATO dead bodies is posted on the Russian media. They're gonna have to show it sooner or later. But they keep saying North Korea because they want World War III. They want to go in and rescue their people. They actually want to put real NATO. You see, fuck all this we've been hiding behind Ukrainian uniforms. No, these people is out of their mind.
Did not allow the enemy to gain a foothold in their positions. It is reported that after a 2-hour battle, with the use of artillery installations and combat aviation, the Ukrainian troops, with heavy losses in manpower and equipment, were forced to retreat towards the Sumy region. According to official data, the Ukrainian army lost about 80 soldiers and 10 pieces of heavy equipment in this battle, including 2 German Leopard tanks. In addition, the Russian side also confirmed the participation of NATO forces on the side of the Ukrainian army during its attempt to break through Russian defenses in the Glushkovsky district of the Kursk region. In total, according to official reports from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, over the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian army, along with NATO forces, lost 400 soldiers, 24 armored combat vehicles, 22 infantry fighting vehicles, 30 pickup trucks, and 3 tanks in the Kursk region. The fact that active duty soldiers and officers of armies of NATO countries are participating in hostilities on the side of the Ukrainian army was also officially confirmed by the permanent representative of Russia to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia. In particular, on October 30th, during a regular UN meeting, he officially stated that the West is no longer able to hide from the world community the participation of NATO soldiers and officers in the current conflict on the side of the Ukrainian army. The Russian army destroys hundreds of NATO soldiers and officers every day in Ukraine. Video footage of dead and captured NATO soldiers and officers appears on the web almost every week. The West is no longer able to hide from the world community the fact that NATO is directly involved in the conflict on the side of Ukraine. And that is why, here at the United Nations, the West is so actively touching on the topic of the arrival of North Korean soldiers in Russia.
That's a fact.
All this is done to distract the world community from the fact that NATO is waging a real war against Russia, the permanent representative of Russia to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, said. A senior Russian diplomat also noted that after each Russian missile strike on the territory of Ukraine, the West began to declare the deaths of its high-ranking officers allegedly as a result of accidents such as heart attacks, falls from mountains, and car accidents. According to the Russian diplomat, all these statements by the West are blatant lies. According to Vasily Nebenzia, all these high-ranking Western officers were killed as a result of Russian missile strikes on the Ukrainian army's headquarters and decision-making centers. By the way, commenting on the situation in the Koronevsky and Sudzansky districts of the Kursk region, war correspondents said that Russian troops continue the systematic destruction of the encircled Ukrainian and NATO soldiers. At the same time, war correspondents also noted that on October 30th, the Russian army units managed to rescue and evacuate 20 civilians from the Glushkovsky, Koronevsky, and Sudzansky districts of the Kursk region. According to them, Russian troops are trying to act very carefully in the invasion zone, trying to save and evacuate as many civilians as possible. Against this backdrop, the authoritative Russian telegram channel Severny Veter announced yet another war crime of the Ukrainian army in the Kursk region. According to this telegram channel, Ukrainian troops not only use civilians as human shields, but also actively use captured Russian soldiers during attacks on Russian troops' positions. It is reported that Ukrainians are tying captured Russian soldiers with explosives and forcing them to go ahead of the Ukrainian troops. As soon as these captured soldiers enter the trenches of the Russian units, a powerful explosion occurs. We call on the international community to respond to the atrocities and war crimes of the Ukrainian army in the Kursk region. Only an army of murderers and cowards can do this. They do not disdain the most vile methods of warfare, the Russian telegram channel said. Many independent military journalists note that the number of such war crimes is increasing every day amid the catastrophic failures of the Ukrainian army not only in the Kursk region, but also in Donbass. Meanwhile, a few hours ago, the head of the Kiev regime, Vladimir Zelensky, rejected General Alexander Syrsky's request to withdraw troops from the Kursk region in order to stabilize the situation in Donbass. According to Zelensky, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine must find other resources to stabilize the situation in Donbass, but not in any way touch the Ukrainian army units located in the Kursk region. According to insiders in Kiev, Zelensky's refusal to withdraw troops from the Kursk region has nothing to do with military strategy. The fact is that the presence of Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region is necessary for the personal PR of the leader of the Kiev regime. The fact is that while Ukrainian troops are holding part of the Kursk region under control, this comedian can continue to tell Western reporters about the allegedly huge success of the Ukrainian army, which is allegedly capable of defeating Russia, if only the West continues to give Kiev the necessary weapons and billions of dollars. Insiders in Kiev claim that on October 30th, during a meeting with Ukrainian generals, Vladimir Zelensky bluntly stated that he did not care about Donbass, and that the most important thing for him was to control 10 square kilometers of Kursk territory, then 50,000 square kilometers in Donbass. At the same time, Zelensky confirmed that for the sake of controlling part of the territory of the Kursk region, he is ready to sacrifice even the most combat-ready units of the Ukrainian army. Well, my friends, judging by the words of Vladimir Zelensky, we will soon witness the complete destruction of Ukrainian and NATO soldiers in the Kursk region.
Don't put the ass on TV.
The footage shows the performance of the Iranian armed forces during the True Promise 2 operation on October 1, 2024, highlighting Tehran's response to Israel with 180 ballistic missiles.
See, Iran said
Oh my God.
Operation Promise.
Another interesting video, which went viral on social media at the end of the month on October 31st, showed the flight and maneuvers of Iranian ballistic missiles, which Iran has so far kept secret, bypassing all Israeli air defense systems and disabling interceptors. New amateur footage, taken from American tourists in Israel, shows the extraordinary landing of a swarm of Iranian ballistic missiles towards the Nevatim air base in the Negev desert, while the air defenses were unable to stop them. White lights like shooting stars appeared that night, all managing to avoid the Iron Dome defensive missiles, which destroyed themselves. Then, a few seconds later, the real shooting stars landed due to the failure of their interceptors, until the missiles reached above the heads of their targets.
In NATO.
Also, during the same operation and time in early October, other newly published footage shows the performance when Iranian missiles fell towards their targets in Tel Aviv. As documented by CCTV security officers, 7 missiles passed through the Israeli Arrow 3 defense system, which is considered the most advanced, especially against ballistic missiles, but it seemed completely ineffective against the incoming Iranian missiles, as the defense missiles followed them. Finally, all the missiles passed through the Arrow 3, which was seen destroying itself in the air and failing to intercept any missiles. As a result, the Iranian missiles exploded and exploded. What would happen if Iran launched the True Promise 3 operation, which promised a definite and painful response to Israel for their attack last weekend?
Oh, it's coming.
Tehran plans to severely punish the Zionist regime. 80 targets have been considered for the operation, according to Iranian diplomats.
The U.S. better mind their business, but they just come too.
community. And no, I'm not talking about their wars on Gaza. The United States and Israel are opposing the will of the entire international community. And no, I'm not talking about their wars on Gaza and Lebanon, which also are opposed by the majority of countries on earth. Instead, today I'm talking about another war that the U.S. is waging. It's economic war against Cuba. For more than 60 years, Washington has imposed an illegal blockade on Cuba. And this is much bigger than just trade restrictions. It's not just that Cuba cannot trade with the U.S., it's that the U.S. has cut Cuba out of the U.S.-dominated international financial system, disconnecting Cuban banks from the international financial messaging network, preventing Cuba from getting access to foreign currency that it needs to pay for imports of things like energy and food. And the U.S. also threatens secondary sanctions on foreign governments and foreign companies that do business with Cuba. And it restricts ships that use Cuban ports from accessing U.S. ports. This is a medieval-style blockade of a small island nation by the world's imperial superpower that has gone on for more than 60 years. And every single year at the United Nations General Assembly, for 32 years in a row, the entire international community has voted to oppose this illegal U.S. blockade. On the 30th of October of 2024, 187 countries in the UN General Assembly voted to call for an end to the U.S. economic, commercial, and financial embargo against Cuba. Only 2 countries voted against this resolution, that is, in support of the blockade: the United States and Israel. I made a map here that shows just how overwhelming this vote is against the U.S. blockade. Now, there are 193 member states in the UN. This means that 97% of all countries on earth voted for this resolution demanding an end to the U.S. embargo. Only one country abstained, which is Moldova in Europe, which currently has a pro-Western government that's trying to join the European Union, and it's basically trying to become the new Ukraine. Moldova, like Ukraine, had been part of the Soviet Union, and since independence, Moldova has officially been a neutral state geopolitically, but it's trying to end its neutrality and basically be absorbed by the US-led NATO bloc. And the current prime minister and president of Moldova are both Romanian citizens. It's very strange that they're allowed to have citizenship of another country while they govern Moldova. But essentially, Moldova is becoming a kind of new Ukraine. And speaking of Ukraine, Ukraine also refused to vote. So they did not officially abstain, but they did not vote, which also shows how Ukraine is violating the will of the entire international community. Now, there were 2 other countries at the UN who did not vote, Venezuela and Afghanistan, and they can't vote at the UN. They lost their right to vote because of illegal US sanctions, unilateral sanctions. Venezuelan's government has repeatedly said that we want to vote at the UN, but we don't have access to our bank accounts and our foreign reserves because of the illegal US sanctions against us, which prevent us from getting access to foreign currencies, especially dollars, and therefore Venezuela lost its right to vote in the UN. So Venezuela, which is under illegal US sanctions, under a US blockade, cannot vote in the UN against the illegal US blockade against Cuba because of the blockade. I mean, this is how much of a criminal rogue regime the US government is. And it's really important to understand this. And the same thing is happening in Afghanistan. Afghanistan lost its right to vote at the UN because it can't pay its membership fees to the UN because of the illegal unilateral US sanctions against it, and also because Washington seized billions of dollars in the foreign exchange reserves of Afghanistan, which has caused hyperinflation in Afghanistan and will likely fuel a famine. So this is the reality of U.S. foreign policy. When Washington talks about the so-called rules-based international order, this is what Washington means. It means taking away the rights of countries to vote at the UN because the US doesn't like their government. So if Venezuela and Afghanistan had not lost their rights to vote because of US sanctions, this vote would have very likely been 189 against 2. This is how much of a rogue regime the US and also Israel are. But by the way, there's one other very interesting detail about this vote that I want to address today, which is that Argentina, which has a very far-right pro-US government, actually voted in support of this resolution. Why is that? Well, it's because Argentina's foreign minister disobeyed orders, and she voted along with the rest of the world. Now, Argentina's current president, Javier Milei, is a self-declared libertarian and anarcho-capitalist, and he's extremely right-wing. He's very pro-US and very pro-Israel. And in fact, the BBC noted that this was the first time since Milei came to office that Argentina has not aligned itself with the US and Israeli governments. So what happened? The foreign minister of Argentina disobeyed orders. She joined 98% of the world in voting against the US blockade. So Milei fired her. This is how desperate the far-right libertarian president of Argentina, Javier Milei, is to be a US puppet. He wants to show Washington, I'm obedient, I will do everything that you want me to do, so I will fire my foreign minister. And to replace the foreign minister, he selected Argentina's ambassador to the US in Washington, another US puppet, in order to run Argentina's foreign policy. So this is what actually existing libertarianism looks like. It means selling off your country to US corporations, selling off your natural resources to billionaire oligarchs like Elon Musk, who has been in Argentina to try to get access to Argentina's lithium. And it means allowing your foreign policy to be run by the US. So Argentina has basically become a US colony under libertarian President Milei. But to visualize just how much of a rogue regime the United States is, let's look at some of the other votes in the UN General Assembly in past years on the same resolution. In 2023, there was another vote, and once again, it was 187 versus 2. And last year, it was actually Ukraine that abstained. And Moldova did not vote. So clearly, the governments of Ukraine and Moldova are basically, NATO puppet regimes, and they're desperately trying to join NATO and volunteering themselves to be proxies that want to fight Russia on behalf of the US-led West. In 2022, the vote was once again the US and Israel versus the world. One big difference in 2022 was that at that time, Brazil was governed by the far-right US puppet leader, Jair Bolsonaro, and he had abstained along with the Ukrainian puppet regime. So we see that there are these governments like Javier Milei in Argentina, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, or the puppet regime in Ukraine that obediently do what the US wants. And in 2022, Moldova once again did not vote, but 185 countries in 2022 voted to end the US blockade against Cuba. So we can see that the US is a rogue regime that doesn't care one iota about international law. Now, why is the US so desperate to try to crush Cuba? Well, the answer is obvious, because Cuba has an independent, anti-imperialist socialist government that led a revolution against a US puppet. Now, we need to go back to 1898 to understand that Cuba essentially was a US colony. In the Spanish-American War in 1898, the US took over several Spanish colonies, including the Philippines, Puerto Rico, which remains a US colony to today, and Cuba. And the US installed a puppet regime in Cuba. And Cuba was basically governed by the United States until the 1950s. And what happened? A revolutionary movement led by Fidel Castro and Ernesto Che Guevara, overthrew the US-backed right-wing puppet dictatorship Fulgencio Batista, who had basically governed Cuba on behalf of the mafia. This was famously illustrated in Godfather Part 2, when the mafia carves up a cake that's shaped like Cuba, which symbolically shows how the US government and organized crime and big corporations governed Cuba like a colony. And in 1959, the Cuban people rose up and overthrew this US puppet dictatorship and had a socialist revolution. Initially, Fidel Castro was not even allied with the Soviet Union. He did not even declare himself a communist, a Marxist-Leninist. It was later, because of the US attack on Cuba, the sanctions against Cuba, the blockade, and the US invasion of Cuba, the failed invasion in the attack in the Bay of Pigs. And in response to these US neo-colonial attacks, Cuba allied with the Soviet Union. And from day one, the US sanctions and blockade against Cuba have been aimed at not only trying to overthrow the Cuban government, but trying to cause hunger and desperation and economic crisis. This was admitted in a US State Department cable from 1960, which you can find on the official website of the State Department's Office of the Historian. In this 1960 cable, the US State Department admitted that, quote, the majority of Cubans support Castro. He had the support of the majority of the population. They admit, quote, there is no effective political opposition, end quote. And then they concluded that, quote, the only foreseeable means of alienating internal support is through disenchantment and disaffection based on economic dissatisfaction and hardship, end quote. So what was their conclusion? That they need to crush the economy of Cuba and starve the Cuban people, which is the definition of collective punishment, to try to overthrow the revolutionary leftist government in La Habana. So this is what the State Department said, quote, every possible means should be undertaken promptly to weaken the economic life of Cuba, end quote. And they said that we should use sanctions and economic war in order to, quote, make the greatest inroads in denying money and supplies to Cuba, to decrease monetary and real wages, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government. That is the stated policy of the US government, quote, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government, end quote. That's the goal. It's not only to punish the Cuban government, it's to punish the Cuban people, to starve them, to deny them energy. And we've seen this recently. This October, there was a horrific blackout in Cuba that hit almost everyone. They lost power for a few days. And this is because the US blockade is suffocating Cuba, because Cuba has been disconnected from the US-controlled international financial system. It is almost impossible to pay for imports because the US dollar is the global reserve currency. And when the global financial system was designed at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, it was the US that was basically put in charge. It was the US that designed it, with its currency at the heart, with the US given veto in the International Monetary Fund and in the World Bank. With the US controls basically the interbank messaging system, which is the SWIFT network. Cuba has no access to any of these institutions. And then the US threatens foreign countries and companies that trade with Cuba and tells ships that if they dock in Cuban ports, they cannot dock in US ports. This is a medieval style blockade to try to suffocate the people of Cuba. This is why the global de-dollarization movement is so important, because the US basically has a financial dictatorship. The global financial system is a dictatorship controlled by the United States. Despite all the US loves to talk about democracy, there is no economic democracy. There's not even political democracy, of course, as we see in the United Nations, right? Because if there were a political democracy, how would the US be able to violate the will of the entire international community? Well, it's because the US has veto power at the UN Security Council, which was designed by the US after World War II, that concentrated all of the power in the Security Council, which means that the US can do whatever it wants. There are no consequences. Israel can do whatever it wants because the US is protecting Israel. There are no consequences. This is a global dictatorship controlled by the US empire, and it's a financial dictatorship run based on the US dollar and the US controlled financial system. And this is why BRICS is so important. This is why BRICS is trying to create alternatives to the US financial dictatorship. And by the way, it's why at the historic summit that was held by BRICS in the Russian city of Kazan this October. That's why 13 new countries were added as partner nations, and among them is Cuba. So Cuba really wants to seek alternatives. It needs alternatives because the U.S. has been suffocating it for so many decades, especially since the 1990s with the overthrow of the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union had been a close ally to Cuba. It had very favorable trade arrangements. It was a financial and economic lifeline for Cuba, and Cuba was thriving at that time during the first Cold War up until the 1980s with the decline of, and then eventually the overthrow of the Soviet Union. And ever since then, the U.S. has tried to crush Cuba, which is why Cuba is now trying to join BRICS and seeking alternatives. And by the way, this barbarism is completely bipartisan in Washington, as is always the case when it comes to U.S. warmongering foreign policy. Joe Biden has continued Donald Trump's suffocation of Cuba. And if you look at the statements by the Biden-Harris White House, of course, Kamala Harris does this as well. They're proud of the fact that they have continued Donald Trump's tightening of the noose around the neck of the Cuban people. Of course, the U.S. blockade in Cuba goes back 60 years. But when Obama was president, he normalized relations with Cuba and he lifted some sanctions, although Obama did not end the blockade. It's very important to emphasize that. He never ended the blockade. He simply softened it a little bit. He lifted some of the sanctions. And then when Trump came in 2017, he massively expanded the sanctions, adding hundreds of new sanctions. And then when Biden and Harris came in 2021, they continued those sanctions and they added new sanctions. And in 2024, once again, the Biden-Harris administration continued with the executive order. They continued the so-called national emergency with respect to Cuba. This is a farce. For decades, the U.S. government has declared a so-called national emergency. How is Cuba, this tiny island nation, threatening the United States? It's not in any way. But of course, every single year, the White House, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, renews this national emergency that goes back to 1996. And then in 2004, the national emergency was expanded. I'm reading here from the White House. In 2004, quote, the national emergency was expanded to deny monetary and material support to the Cuban government, end quote. At that time, of course, it was the neoconservative George Bush administration, which now, I mean, the Democrats are all pro-Bush. The neoconservatism has become completely bipartisan. The Trump administration was run by neocons. The Biden-Harris administration is run by neocons. And in 2018, Donald Trump expanded the national emergency. And then what happened? Joe Biden has continued these policies, this bipartisan barbarism, this neocolonialism. But by the way, it's not just Cuba. The U.S. is a complete rogue regime. When you look constantly at the United Nations, at the UN General Assembly, it's not just on the blockade against Cuba. The U.S. is constantly voting against the entire world. This is a vote from May 2024 on a resolution in the General Assembly that called to admit Palestine as a full member. It was 143 countries against 9. It was the U.S. and Argentina and Hungary and a few other puppets that voted against membership for Palestine, whereas the vast majority of the population of the world voted to support Palestine. And then a few Western countries abstained. Or here's a vote from November 2023, which was a resolution in the UN General Assembly that called for equitable geographical distribution in the membership of the human rights treaty bodies. That is to say, it called for equal representation for the global South. Once again, it was the West against the rest of the world. Here's a vote in the same session in November 2023 that was on a resolution calling to respect human rights and cultural diversity. Once again, the West against the rest of the world. Here's a vote from the same session in November on a resolution calling for the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order. The West against the rest of the world. And finally, here's another vote from November, which is very relevant to the discussion of Cuba, which is a separate resolution that called for an end to unilateral coercive measures, that is, sanctions for violating human rights. And again, it's the West versus the rest of the world. These sanctions are against international law. So this resolution should not be controversial. It's saying that we should respect international law and stop violating international law. But the US violates international law more than all other countries on earth. The United States has illegal unilateral sanctions against 60% of poor countries and 1/3 of all countries on earth. That's according to reporting from the Washington Post. 1/3 of all countries are sanctioned by the US, 60% of poor countries. These sanctions violate international law, but there are no consequences for Washington because the US has veto power in the UN Security Council, which is the only body in the UN that actually has teeth. So this is the sad reality of the world that we live in. The US government constantly talks about the so-called rules-based order, and Washington attacks Beijing, claiming that China and Russia and other countries they don't like supposedly violate the rules-based international order in which the United States makes the rules and orders everyone around. That's what they mean. They mean the West makes the rules. And if you don't go along with what the US-led West wants, they say that we're going to sanction you. You're violating the rules-based order. This is what the global South is fighting. This is what BRICS is fighting. This is what the G77 and the non-aligned movement are fighting. In the 1990s, with the overthrow of the Soviet Union and the end of the First Cold War, the unipolar era was a dictatorship. It was a global dictatorship controlled by the US-led West. And now even Europe is increasingly being subordinated to the United States. This is what the US is waging a new Cold War over. The US global dictatorship is trying to destroy any country that poses a threat to its global dominance, to the dominance of US corporations. The US wants its corporations to colonize the entire world. The US wants to overthrow any independent government that gets in the way of US corporations in Wall Street, like Cuba, like China, like Vietnam, any country that has a socialist system that doesn't even, any country that has some kind of nationalist system that does not allow the US to privatize all of their natural resources. Any country that refuses to impose neoliberal policies that are demanded by the US-dominated financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. This is what we're talking about. It's a global fight against a US dictatorship that's ultimately centered in Wall Street. Those are the beneficiaries, the capitalist oligarchs in Wall Street who have hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth. They have benefited from this system, whereas the majority of people around the world have not benefited. So this is why it's so important to see what's actually happening in these votes of the United Nations. It's important to see that the US does not actually represent democracy or human rights or international law. On the contrary, the US empire is fighting against, tooth and nail, it's fighting against international law. It's fighting against international democracy and human rights. And this is what we are constantly going to report on because, unfortunately, you're not going to get this perspective in mainstream corporate media, which just simply represents, it regurgitates the propaganda of the US government and other Western governments. On
Just today, there was a UN vote where the entire world, and I mean the entire world, when I say the entire world, I don't mean what the US means when they say the international community, like a handful of countries that agree with the US. Whenever the US says the international community is united against Putin, what they mean is the US, Western Europe, maybe Australia, Japan, and that's pretty much it. The rest of the world doesn't count as the international community. When I say the entire world, I mean every single country on this planet opposes the embargo that the United States has imposed on Cuba for 6 decades now that has suffocated and strangled that island. It hasn't changed the government. It hasn't caused any suffering among the leaders of the government, the ostensible reason to do it, but it has completely immiserated the population. The embargo means that not only can American companies not engage in any trade with Cuba, and not only are American citizens barred from even visiting Cuba, let alone doing business with Cuba, if you even try to go to Cuba by coming from Mexico or South America, you are subject to felony charges from the United States government. But they also, part of the sanctions are that no company in the world is permitted to trade with Cuba. And if a country does trade with Cuba, the United States government will then sanction them, which will harm that company a great deal because of the supremacy of the US dollar. And it's just had the effect of preventing any money from entering Cuba, any goods from entering Cuba, from them selling their goods, with very rare exception. And the entire world is against it. Even Western Europe, even the allies in Asia. And there was a vote today at the UN calling for the end to the US embargo in Cuba. Every single country on the planet, every single country, even Ukraine, voted yes to end this embargo. This embargo is evil, it's immoral, it's destructive. There were only 3 countries that did not vote yes. One of them abstained, that was Moldova. The only 2 countries who voted no on this resolution were the United States and Israel. We constantly are the rogue countries in the world. We constantly tie ourselves to Israel, and we stay together and we isolate ourselves from the rest of the world. Many of the UN resolutions on Israel, the United States either vetoed, even though the whole world was in favor, or stood alone only with Israel and a couple of other stray countries in order to defend Israel. So Matthew Miller, the White House, the State Department spokesman, was asked today about this as well. Like, why is the US and Israel alone in the world in insisting on the continuation of the suffocation of Cuba that never changes the government, doesn't affect the government at all, just makes the people in Cuba have miserable lives and face constant generation-long deprivation? And here's what he said.
So the vote happened today in the UN on the Cuba embargo. You know what the vote was?
Yeah, it was a predictable vote in line with past votes.
Yeah, exactly. But just for the record, let's say it was 187 to 2, 1 abstention.
I am aware.
The 1 abstention wasn't even a Pacific Island nation; it was Moldova.
Yeah, I'm aware of the long history of UN votes on this matter.
Yes. Okay. So, at what point, though, are you guys going to realize that the entire world, with the exception of you and Israel, thinks that the embargo is a really bad idea and should be stopped?
Look, I think we are quite clear on the opinion of other countries around the world, and it's one with which we disagree. We take their opinion seriously, but we make our own policy determinations.
It's 32 years in a row, with the exception of 1 year when you guys abstained.
We take their views quite seriously, but we make our own determinations about these matters, and we disagree.
You take their views quite seriously? That's not borne out by the facts that you continue to persist.
With this type of shit going on, no empire thought the world would be better without them when they fail. When the world has had enough of your shit. You see, when we keep doing this, the world not gonna say nothing. They just gonna be waiting for Russia and China and North Korea and Iran, and just to get it over quick. They gonna look the other way. Just please get rid of the US.
Just for this,
we take them seriously, but we make our own decisions on that and others. So.
Okay, and are you comfortable then with it's just once again, it's just you and Israel standing up?
Certainly, we would welcome other countries sharing our opinion in this, but we're not blind to the history of countries around the world having a very different view of this matter. Long predates this administration, but as I said, we make our own determinations. And with that,
no, it's very similar to Israel. There's absolutely no reason to suffocate the island of Cuba, except for the fact that there is a large Cuban population in the United States and other Latino citizens who have come from places in Latin America like Venezuela that are very anti-communist. Those are often the people who end up in the United States, and they just want to see punitive measures against Cuba to just expel their hatred against the Cuban government and communist leaders. The problem is it has no effect. It has no success. It has no purpose other than to cause the people in that country to suffer. And the only reason the United States is willing to isolate itself from the entire world and insist on a policy that has been going on for 6 decades and is afraid to end the embargo in Cuba is the same reason they're afraid to defy Israel, for purely domestic political reasons. They don't want to alienate the pro-Israel voters and pro-Israel donors, both Jews and evangelicals and whoever else has a great affinity to Israel, and they don't want to alienate Cuban and Latino voters, especially Cuban voters in Florida, Latino voters in key swing states, even if it means continuing to not only impose extreme suffering on the people of Cuba, who they're ostensibly trying to help, but also, again, appearing to the rest of the world to be this country that just goes around making huge numbers of people suffer with their superior military force and their superior financial power. And that is what is driving more and more countries away from the United States and into the arms of competing alliances, including the one led by China. And the US government just seems, from one president to the next, from one party to the next, to be attached to these policies, even though they so blatantly harm American interests. Thanks for watching this clip from
circumstances right now, but they are not exactly just random. There's a lot behind it. And by a lot, I mean the United States government. To talk more about this, we are very honored to be joined by Manolo de los Santos, who is, among many other superlatives I could list, the co-executive director of the People's Forum and a researcher at Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Manolo, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thank you for having me on again.
Well, listen, it's there is no other choice to talk about this because I think there's so much misinformation here. I mean, Cuba's been going through extreme blackouts, and the way that it's often presented is this is just the long-term mismanagement of socialism, that there's just nothing else that's going on. So without me editorializing too much, I mean, what is behind the blackouts that we've seen in Cuba?
Well, you know, for the U.S. government, it's always so easy to deny any responsibility at all, to say that Cuba is a failed state and somehow never admit that its sanctions have any impact on the Cuban economy and on the Cuban people. What's been happening is, in fact, not a story of this past week, but actually a story of the past few years, which is that since Trump put in place a series of sanctions that specifically target Cuba's ability to import fuel, and not just fuel, but even the opportunity to import spare parts for its electrical grid, that electrical grid has severely deteriorated to the point that it needs massive, and I would say almost billionaire repairs to a system in order to continue operating. Add to this that since Cuba was added to the state sponsors of terrorism list by Trump at the very end of his administration, literally in January as he was about to leave the White House, it has also meant that Cuba is not allowed to make the majority of its financial transactions with banks around the world in order to even try to purchase these fuels or spare parts on other markets. Meaning the perfect storm was created so that sooner or later, like it did last week, Cuba would be caught in a situation where its electrical grid, under high demand because of the extreme weather of these past few months in Cuba, would be forced to crash. And, you know, there are many grids around the world that are facing this similar situation. In Nigeria, in Puerto Rico, and many other parts of the world. But only in Cuba are the hands of the government literally tied to their backs, being prevented from being able to solve this problem with normal measures. Cubans instead have to resort to their ingenuity, to their creativity, to basically reformulate with the parts that they already have a solution for this national grid. And after 3.5 days of severe blackout, the Cubans brought the national grid back on. But the larger question remains, which is, how long can Cuba continue to sort of make small repairs to this national electoral grid when they are not able to make the necessary repairs that are impeded by the US blockade and these vicious sanctions that Trump put in place, but Biden has kept all these years after?
Yeah, I think the irony is the way that the U.S. frames this as, oh, it's just the mismanagement of socialism, when actually it's capitalism. It's American capitalism, American imperialism is what's doing this. And I think it's hard for people sometimes to wrap their heads around what you're explaining, because this is why sanctions can be effective in that narrative, because they take time, especially when it comes to infrastructure decay. And I remember when I was looking into the electricity infrastructure of Syria and how it's just completely deteriorated over the last 10 years, specifically because of US sanctions. It's like electricity infrastructure, power plants, they need constant spare parts all the time. You have to have like a constant backup of everything, because everything is always breaking and needs to be replaced, because there's such high demand on that sort of infrastructure. And so if you can't constantly get in these spare, like parts of machines you've never even heard of, right? It's like, it's eventually going to fail. And I want to ask you also, Manolo, because Cuba, of course, putting them on the state sponsor of terrorism list, and then also the added sanctions under Trump that Biden kept intact, in addition to the blockade Cuba's already subjected to for over 60 years. On top of that, there's sanctions on Venezuela that have impacted Cuba, because if I'm not mistaken, Venezuela used to give fuel to Cuba. So that's like a secondary way that sanctions hurt Cuba. Could you talk a little bit about that aspect of this as well? Though I'm not sure if that contributed specifically to this outage, but it does impact Cuba's ability to access fuel.
But I think you bring a very important point, Rania, which is we're not just talking about the sanctions or the blockade against Cuba. We're actually living in a world where the US sanctions a third of the countries on the planet, and that affects all of the countries involved. Because ultimately, if the sanctions by the US were only limited to US companies, you could say, well, countries like Cuba or Syria or Venezuela or Zimbabwe then have other opportunities to trade with other countries. But the reality is that all these sanctions placed by the US are internationally applied by what, in my opinion, is a rogue state called the United States. I mean, these are extraterritorial applications of US law, to the point that I have a very recent experience. I just was hearing from colleagues in Cuba where they were purchasing spare parts, for example, from a French company that was going to ship spare parts for Cuba's electrical grid, but that halfway as they were being shipped to Cuba, they were stopped. The ship was turned around because the US literally had to tell the French company that one of the spare parts had a small percentage of US components and therefore could not be sold to Cuba. This applies to the ships that Cuba uses to apply to buy fuel for its national grid. Many times coming from Venezuela. Venezuela and Cuba are not that far apart physically, but even ships between Venezuela and Cuba are sanctioned literally from doing that trade. So we live in a world where we're going to have to create an alternative system that we really hope is born out of BRICS, out of a new multipolarity, but that effectively challenges the US rogue state rule of disorder and impose terror on the people of the world. I mean, imagine a world in which not just the Cuban people, but millions of people on the planet are subject to the whims of the Department of Treasury and OFAC.
Mm-hmm.
Manolo, I think one of the other factors here is that even in the context of the blackout and all these other challenges, the sort of broader Cuban revolutionary process was not inert. I mean, like, obviously, I'm glad you mentioned Nigeria. The power's off all the time, and the government is just like, oh, sorry, hope it works out for you next time. But, I think I want you to talk a little bit about what we saw, the forms of social solidarity, the different pieces that emerged in Cuba, and that kind of, I hate to even say like the government, like sort of like the merging of the sort of the people's aspirations and the governmental apparatus that can kind of spring into action. And even if it's not 100% adequate, can at least try to meet people's needs as much as you can under very difficult circumstances.
Well, I think this is where the US always makes the worst and wrongest assumptions about Cuban reality, is that they assume that under their maximum pressure campaign, which is, in every way, shape, or possible, designed to basically make the Cuban economy collapse, to make Cuban society, the social fabric of Cuban society, collapse. The reality is that the Cuban people are highly resilient and highly united. They have a sense of purpose, which for over 2 centuries has been defined by fighting for their ultimate and total independence from the US, from Spain, from any empire that tries to take over Cuba. And, immediately the response throughout Cuba was that the neighbors responded in an organized fashion. Those who could provide wood to make fire, to cook, did so. Pots and pans were brought out to make, meals for their neighbors. Whoever did have, a little shred of electricity at the hospitals or at certain institutions immediately shared it so that people could charge their phones and charge their other apparatuses. I mean, no one was left abandoned. And I think one of the things that Cuban society is well known for is that, it has such an incredible response to disaster system. In the middle of all this severe blackout, a Hurricane Oscar, hit Cuba, eastern Cuba, particularly the provinces of Guantanamo and Holguin. And you would think that how would a country be able to respond to this when they have no electricity? There's no way to communicate any information by television or by radio. And the reality is that the Cuban civil defense was up and running. Sadly, 7 people died as a result of the hurricane, but thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives were saved because people were still able to be evacuated. Their goods and their homes were saved, and greater disaster was averted. But this is a result of Cuba not necessarily having an unlimited amount of resources. What it has is unlimited capacity to take care of people, and that's based on its human resources.
Manolo, I think it's really important during a moment like this, when just so much harm is being done to this country or that area or this area, to recognize that there's a pattern here in who's carrying out these atrocities. And you've often done this, and I think it's important to do it. You'll connect what's happening in Cuba to what's happening in Gaza. I mean, obviously they're very different things, but they're also not so dissimilar because it's the same forces that are stacked against them. So I'm just curious if you can explain how it's basically the same enemy there.
Well, I always like to point out that the history of the United States, the history of colonialism, the history of its becoming an imperialist power have been based on genocide. Genocide is part of the DNA of American government and American society. And it has extended this genocidal approach to life, to dealing with the difference in others, to dealing with literally the other, through war and extermination, to death and destruction. We see it in Gaza, where people were kept under siege, under a blockade, under sanctions for years, for simply having what the US considered was the wrong government. They shouldn't have elected the wrong government. The Cubans have had to pay for that same crime of electing and having their own government chosen by them, but happens to be the wrong one according to the US, for over 60 years now. But these are not exceptional cases. This is, in fact, the rule. This is the norm that the US has been trying to impose on the world, almost as a tale to tell others. If you go down the path of independence, if you choose and try to make your own determinations as a country, as a people, you will pay the full price. And the price is there for everyone to see. The price of freedom is called Gaza, and the price of freedom is called Cuba. And we're in a moment in history where there is a uprising, a global uprising for justice, for liberation. We have a responsibility as part of that global uprising to say all sanctions and blockades must end now, because they go against our basic human dignity. I mean, to hear of the Palestinian students who are on scholarship in Cuba right now, when you hear their stories about how they grew up under siege in Gaza and what it is to be medical students in Cuba under siege now, you see the harrowing similarities. But you also see just an incredible identification and sympathy in their capacity to fight. Neither the people of Gaza nor the people of Cuba have given up. They have chosen that freedom is more precious than anything else. And for that, they're willing to live out the consequences of these sanctions. But that means then that the people in the United States have a deep responsibility to transform this reality, because it is on us. How long are we going to allow the people of Gaza and the people of Cuba to simply suffer under US sanctions? We have to end this now. And we've actually put a message out directly to President Biden saying, on Cuba, you have literally 90 days left in your administration to take Cuba off the state sponsors of terrorism list. It's a simple review that can be done on your simple stroke of a pen. The time is now. There's no valid reason to keep Cuba on that list. With that alone, it would be a huge change in Cuba's situation and its ability to respond to natural disasters and to this severe energy crisis.
Mm-hmm. Well, real quick before we let you go, Manolo, on that point, I know that you all at the People's Forum are organizing various different points to assist the Cuban people in this difficult humanitarian situation. Well, I guess there it is on the bottom of the screen. I was going to say, where do people go to learn more? But say more about the efforts people will find if they go to the address there that we see on the screen.
Well, at the People's Forum, we're going to continue to advocate loudly and very publicly to take Cuba off this list, but we also feel it's a huge responsibility at this moment to send material aid. I mean, Cuba's facing this triple threat of a blockade, a severe energy crisis, and a hurricane. So we wanted to respond by sending urgently needed power generators, sending urgently needed food and other supplies, medicine, everything that could be used to relieve the Cuban people, particularly in the hardest hit province of Guantanamo. Now, we have joined with the Hatway Project and with the Party for Socialism and Liberation to launch a fundraiser that now has a stated goal of 100,000, but we know we can raise more because we feel that the people of the United States and people around the world feel sympathy for the Cuban people. They are our brothers and sisters, so we know we can raise more than $100,000. But all of this is already going to support the Cuban people. Already, right now, we have a plane being filled with power generators. We just need your help to get it to the finish line and to get more on their way in the next few days.
Mm-hmm. Well, as always, Manolo de los Santos, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Today is Monday, October 28th, and we're having Larry Johnson with us. Welcome back, Larry.
I'm pleased to be here, Nima.
Let's talk about the latest information on the conflict. We talk about the Israeli attack on Iran on the night that they did it. Right now, what's in your opinion, we have a bigger picture right now. How did you find the Israeli attack on Iran?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. If you listen to the Israelis, excuse me, boy, massive victory. They knocked out every single air defense system that Iran had. They took out the S-300s. They hit military targets. They blew up rocket factories. Great victory. Now, they're delusional. It's I think the scientific term is, it's bullshit. So the reality of what happened is Israel's plan was to first throw missiles into Iran, because they were going to fly in there with their own aircraft. They were smart enough to recognize that there were some air defense systems that they might be put at jeopardy of being shot down. So they use standoff air-launched ballistic missiles, and the point was to suppress, it's called SEAD, SEAD, suppress enemy air defense. That was their initial objective. That failed. They did not suppress enemy air defense. Yeah, they blew up one or two, but for the most part, they didn't. I think they had planned a much more extensive attack with follow-on strikes that, in theory, they were going to suppress the enemy air defense, and they're going to hit all these military facilities and drone factories and rocket missile factories. They failed. And you can see part of that failure by, there were some videos posted early on where you could see the interceptions taking place. And what a contrast it was as compared to Iran's strike on Israel on October 1st. There is that now famous video out of Nevatim where you could see strike after strike after strike hitting the ground, and that the Israelis were intercepting it. And of course, then they come up with the excuse, well, we didn't really want to intercept that. It was, we knew it was going to hit something that wasn't important, so we left it alone. We weren't going to rest missiles on it. Good coping skills. I have, I know a ardent Zionist. I can't even call him a friend because I think he's despicable. But he wrote initially like, oh man, they're overwhelming the Iranian air defense. They're taking them out. The nuclear site, it was just like, okay. And then I wrote back, well, not really. And oh boy, he attacked. Well, 8 hours later, he's singing a different tune. He's going, well, see, this was a limited strike. Israel didn't really want to put everything at risk. You guys just recognize from the standpoint of Israel, anybody they're objectively thinking about it, they should have reached this conclusion. Iran has the capability to penetrate and defeat Israeli air defense systems. Israel does not, I repeat, does not have the capability to penetrate and defeat Iranian air defense systems, in part because you got the Russians helping the Iranians. And the systems proved not pretty effective, very effective. And we know this just by judging the reaction so far of the government of Iran and just actually sort of Iranian social media. There's no sort of demand for revenge, demand for response that, what happens when you get punched in the nose and it hurts. They're more like I got this itchy little mosquito bite on my arm, but it's, it was an annoyance, but it wasn't anything, it was no big deal. So we're looking at Israel trying to cope with the realization that it's no longer the mightiest military power in the Middle East. Your sound's off, Nima.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now.
And they're talking about their fighter jets invading the airspace of Iran. Do we have any?
No, they didn't. They never did. They never got in there. I mean, they just didn't. If they had, it would have been shot down. So
it seems that, Larry, Israel doesn't have capabilities to send missiles from Israel to Iran. They have to carry them by fighter jets, then shoot it at Iran.
No, I think that they've got some ballistic missile capability that can be ground launched. They chose not to use it for whatever reason. I don't know if it's that there's a limited supply, or in their judgment that those missiles would not necessarily be accurate as to what they use by launching from the air. But again, they tried to say, "Oh, this was a limited strike." It was 100 friggin' aircraft for the love of God. Really? Limited? It wasn't limited. And if each one of those planes carried, two air-launched missiles, that's a 200 missile barrage. Some are saying that it actually Israel ended up launching close to 600 missiles. So we don't know what the real number is. All we know is that Iran had vowed that if it had been attacked, it was going to retaliate. They haven't retaliated, not because they were so damaged and so hurt, but because they prevailed. And they prevailed, I think, with the assistance of the Russians, who played a very critical role. Because it's part of it's in Russia's interest to make sure that this thing does not escalate any further than it is at present. They try to keep it contained. And candidly, I suspect Russian intelligence analysts and maybe some of the Iranian intelligence analysts are starting to judge that Israel is now in a war of attrition that it cannot win. And by the losses it's suffering, not just in terms of casualties on the battlefield and equipment, but economically and population that's fleeing. What happens to Israel over the next 6 to 12 months isn't a pretty picture, because clearly Hezbollah can sustain and intensify the fight beyond what it already has. And Israel's already suffering the pain of trying to go into southern Lebanon. So the last thing they need is to expand the war. And they can't even fight a one-front war. They can't defeat Hamas in Palestine so far in the Gaza Strip. But now that they're in trading blows with Hezbollah, and then active in the West Bank, and then with the Houthis still retaining their capability to attack, and now trying to expand the war to Iran, Israel's overreached.
If we consider the conflict between Iran and Israel as a conflict of establishing deterrence, who was capable of achieving that?
Oh, I think Iran was. The typical, and I run across this in some of the comments, like to when Andre and I were with you as the attack was underway, and commenting on it. Some of the comments from some of the more ardent Zionists who come to the side to say, "Oh, you're all wrong. You don't know what you're talking about." They grab hold of a belief about Israeli military superiority in all things, and you can show them any amount of facts, and it won't shake them off those facts. They just continue to insist, "Oh no, we're right." Okay, but the reality, what happened, early Saturday morning in Iran, and late Friday here on the East Coast of the United States, was that really for the first time in 70 years, Israel carried out a very high-profile military attack from the air and failed. All the spin, all the stories planted in the New York Times and Jerusalem Post and Haaretz about, "Oh, we did great, man. We took out all these." The rest of everybody else in the region knows what happened. They go, Iran stopped Israel. They stopped them. Because the initial reports out of Israel, they were going to sustain that for like 12 hours. And, they called it off after 3. Why? They recognized they were wasting missiles. Now, if their goal was to see if they could attrit Iran's air defense system by forcing them to fire lots of missiles, that could have been a military objective, but that clearly it wasn't. They intended to destroy the air defense systems and a lot of the ground radars, and Israel failed to do so.
Yeah. Larry, if you consider those Arab states together with Turkey after these interactions between Iran and Israel? In your opinion, is the picture of Israel changing in their mind?
You mean among the Israeli population, the Jewish population?
No, I'm talking about the Arab states.
Well, yeah, I think it's starting to change. I think this was the assessment of Iran, I think in particular, is changing because they're seeing, what happened in April, the first strike, was a demonstration that Iran had the capability to fire a variety of weapon systems at Israel. The second strike on October 1st was a clear message to Israel that we can penetrate your air defense system, that Iron Dome is not impregnable. And now, add to that, they've shown that they could stop an Israeli attack that was intended really to cripple Iran militarily. I think you may have read what I posted on my sonar21.com, but the comment from this ardent Zionist about, initially, boy, they were working to roll over the Iranians. The Iranians had nothing. They're backward. They're just defenseless. That's not what happened. But, part of my frustration is, can you get the people to actually acknowledge the facts about what happened? And that's very difficult.
Larry, it seems that Israeli media channel reported that only 3 Hezbollah fighters killed and wounded an entire Israeli forces of 20 soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're talking about this in the Israeli media, how could be that the situation between Israel and Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon? Because at the end of the day, Netanyahu needs to do something in the southern part of Lebanon with this situation. They have to come to a solution, or maybe, I don't know if they want to continue this conflict in that region.
Well, they're trying to figure out how to, again, extricate themselves. It's a repeat of 2006. 2006, they thought they could roll in there and overwhelm Hezbollah. Now, what Israel is doing is really in sort of sharp contrast to 2006, is they're making far more extensive use of aerial bombardment of cities and villages with Israeli aircraft, and including Christian villages, places that really have nothing to do with Hezbollah or not critical part of Hezbollah's military infrastructure. Israel's engaged in genocide, pure and simple. They are doing nothing but attacking hospitals, schools, humanitarian centers, all in the name of fighting terror. They're using terrorism to fight terrorism. And those are words coming out of my mouth that I never thought I would say, but it is just a simple fact. And meanwhile, Hezbollah, I'm not the only one that predicted this. Scott Ritter's talked about it. Doug McGregor's talked about it. I think Danny Davis has talked about it. That the Hezbollah forces have an extensive network of tunnels and defensive emplacements in southern Lebanon. And the terrain in southern Lebanon is very difficult. It's a mountainous region, and so there are limited access points, and many of those access points provide an excellent opportunity for setting up ambushes. But that's exactly what Hezbollah is doing to Israel, and it's inflicting, probably almost 10 times the number of casualties that Israel experienced going into Gaza Strip. I mean, Gaza Strip was cities of people with no real armed presence of Hamas. Hamas was not a massive military insurgent force. Yeah, they were present, but not anything like what Hezbollah is. And Hezbollah, in contrast to the Hamas fighters, are a bunch of combat hardened veterans. They fought in Syria, they fought against ISIS, and now they're turning around and they're being very effective in killing and wounding Israeli soldiers in large numbers. And so you're getting almost daily reports of 2 dead, 5 dead, 4 dead. The other day it was 8 and 17 wounded, something like that. Israel's not going to be able to sustain that. They can't sustain those kinds of losses. They're not that big.
When you look at the behavior of Israel, they went into Gaza. They failed to achieve anything. And right now, instead of coming out with a solution for the situation in Gaza, or maybe negotiating, they went to southern part of Lebanon. And right now, with this attack on Iran, these interactions between Iran and Israel, it seems that the end game was to bring the United States in to help them to save the situation, because they're not capable of doing this, Larry. In Gaza, in the southern part of Lebanon, right now with Iran, can we say that the United States getting involved on the part of Israel to fight all of these people together, all of these countries together, has failed so far?
Yeah, if that was their objective, certainly it has failed. But their goal in Gaza is to try to depopulate Gaza, and they're having some success with that. Except they've not opened up a pathway where the Palestinians there in Gaza can flee, can leave, and depart someplace else. They just keep moving them around like pieces on a chessboard, and killing them and starving them. They're literally trying to exterminate the Palestinian people, and the inhumanity of it is staggering. And the world so far has stood by idle. Some criticism, some condemnation. Writing a stern letter, but there's nothing really that's going to hurt Israel for its conduct. It's remarkable that Israel can point to October 7th as justification for what it's doing. They killed 1,200 of our people. Let's accept that number is true. It was actually, I think, 1,159 is what the Israelis finally came up with. Let's ignore the reality that maybe as much as 50% of those Israeli casualties that day were inflicted by Israel itself to try to stop Hamas from taking hostages back into Gaza. So, but let's say the full 1,200, count that. And since then, Israel's killed close now, the numbers are approaching 50,000. Minimum 50,000 men, women, and children. I used to, when I brought this up before with some of these ardent Zionists, you can't trust those numbers. Those are the Palestinians are making them up. Well, just the other day, Matthew Miller, State Department spokesman, was just celebrating the death of Aya Sinwar, and said, quote, and Sinwar is responsible for the 40,000 plus deaths of Palestinians in Gaza. I go, he's at least now admitted the number of dead from the State Department. The State Department is even accepting that number. Now, they're blaming Sinwar for killing all the Palestinians. Yeah, I got that right. The Israelis dropped the bombs, but it's the Palestinian fault. Great. That kind of logic It was the Jews who were responsible for the Holocaust. They killed themselves in those gas chambers, that kind of. Please. So the fact of the matter is, Israel's campaign to wipe out these Palestinians, it's having some success. Now, the question is, can they sustain it to the point that they'll finally be able to enter? Because already you got the Ben Gavirs and Smotriches claiming they're getting the bulldozers ready so they can go ahead and start occupying, taking over. They're like ravenous locusts.
Do you think that then Netanyahu is able to sustain the situation in Israel? Because recently there was a funeral in Israel. He was talking and people were protesting, and they were saying that they're not happy with the situation because there is thought. It seems that Israelis are understanding the pain right now.
I don't think so.
Invasion of the southern part of Lebanon because they're losing their people.
Yeah, well, the realization's starting to dawn on them. But right now, still Netanyahu has the majority support of the population. Yeah, there's some Israelis speaking out, but that is my understanding. Netanyahu is speaking at a ceremony commemorating the 1-year attack on October 7th. And it was there that he was met with some of the protesters saying, now, make peace, reach a negotiation. This idea of making peace presupposes that what's going on between the Zionists and the Palestinian people, and it doesn't matter whether the Palestinians are Muslim, Christian, atheist, doesn't matter. The Zionists believe that land where those Palestinians are located on right now is there. It belongs to the Zionists. It doesn't belong to these Palestinian people. The families that have inhabited places in the West Bank for generations, literally hundreds, going back more than 1,000 years, that they don't have a right to that land. That belongs to the Jews. Began that, and so there's nothing to negotiate here. The only negotiation is how fast are you going to pack up your shit and get out of my land. That's the Zionist mentality. So I fully understand why the Palestinians are fighting them, and I guess if we had magical powers, the reality would be you would go in, you would take all those 700,000 settlers out of the West Bank, force them back into the territory originally ceded to Israel in 1948, go back to the pre-1967 borders, and then put in some real UN muscle, which is a contradiction in terms, I realize, an oxymoron. But, put in Russian troops, American troops, Chinese troops, major power countries, so that neither side would dare to try to shoot them, attack them, and keep the two sides separate. But that's not going to happen. And so this thing's going to go on. Frankly, I don't see how Israel sustains itself and remains intact as a country. I don't know how long that will take, but the process, what has transpired over the last year, despite all this support from Zionists in the United States, you don't see all of them packing up and saying, man, it's time to move to Israel to stand with our people. They're not doing that. They're getting the hell out. People are leaving Israel to come back to the United States or go, even Bibi Netanyahu's son. He's hanging out in Miami. The trend line for Israel, the trajectory, is not good. And I think what we're going to see in the next week or two is Hamas is really going to intensify its attacks. Again, if I'm the Iranians, you sit there and you start weighing your options to respond to what Israel did Saturday morning in Iran with its attacks. You can say, okay, if we launch outwardly, we respond directly. This does run the risk of escalation. It does run the risk of, maybe compelling that Israel will feel compelled to use nuclear weapons. But so is that our only option? Oh, heavens no. We can boost the capabilities of Hezbollah and the Houthis. We're going to actually give them some weapon systems that they haven't had previously that they will be able to employ against the Israelis. And so using proxies to attack Israel will just further weakens Israel. And then the Israelis got to, they have to figure out, okay, well, what are we going to do? What's next?
In your opinion, does Hezbollah need Iranian forces helping them in Lebanon?
Well, to define that a little bit, I mean, right now, Hezbollah is quite capable of continuing sustaining the fight. But any assistance provided from Iran would be quite welcome. So they're not dependent on it, but it's certainly beneficial. So you can't minimize that as being unimportant.
Larry, when you look at Israel, you talk about people who are supporting Netanyahu right now. And how, in your opinion, in terms of the public opinion in Israel, which is so delusional, because recently, when you see journalists talking about by the assassination of Nasrallah and the commanders, Hezbollah was defeated, just go in the southern part of Lebanon and destroy everything. When a journalist thinking this way, you look at the public opinion, ordinary people who are not that much familiar with the situation in the southern part of Lebanon. What would be the situation that can bring some sort of sanity to these people who are living in Israel, who are giving the support to Netanyahu?
Casualties. It'd be a combination of casualties and physical destruction inside Israel. So Hezbollah yesterday, on Sunday, had issued an evacuation warning, just like Israel has warned certain areas in Lebanon now, get out, or you're going to be at risk. Hezbollah issued the same to, I believe, 25 different settlements in northern Israel. So that tells me they intend to step up attacks. And so you get the combination of these kibbutzim being destroyed and getting hit with some major explosions, doing significant damage, and then casualties, both among Israeli troops and then among Israeli civilians. Israel has really never paid a significant price militarily for its attacks. Its attacks, I think combined casualties from the 6-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, the going into Beirut, Lebanon in 2006, and now this. I think the total KIA from all those combined is fewer than 5,000. I don't want to minimize. 5,000 is still a large number, particularly it's one of your loved ones. But it's really insignificant compared to the size of the Israeli military force. But if the casualty count starts going up, that all of a sudden, if Israel is lost over the course of the next 6 months, they lose 3,000 KIA in southern Lebanon. That's too much. I mean, they will have lost more in 6 months, 7 months in southern Lebanon than the United States lost in Iraq and all of its occupation over 15 years in terms of KIA. So it is, it's the simplest way to put it is the Israeli public's got to feel the pain. They've got to feel the combination of the grief from loss of life and the economic pain because the economy is imploding. Those two things, I think, will help awaken them from their delusional fantasy that they can exterminate the Palestinian people.
Welcome back to my channel, guys. Welcome back. What we have today, 4 elite right unit, quote unquote, or Wraith unit. I don't know how to say it or pronounce it. Soldiers killed. These are all from the elite group from ITF, Israeli Terrorist Forces. The army announced on Tuesday the deaths of 4 soldiers, including an officer, during a military operation in Jabalia in northern Gaza. Now, this is not the first time they have lost high-ranking officials in Gaza. This is where things get interesting, because you would not expect high-ranking officials getting killed, or high-ranking terrorists, I should say, getting killed in Gaza. Why? Because the resistance in Gaza is almost really nothing compared to the resistance in Lebanon by Hezbollah. Nevertheless, they're losing not just soldiers, but they're losing high-ranking officers, terrorists, whichever way you want to call it. Let's take a look at this more. But before I do that, just to remind you guys, most of my viewers are not subscribed. If you happen to be one of them, consider subscribing. I want to start off with something very, very interesting, and I will elaborate on this 4 death of the elite high-ranking officials, quote-unquote high-ranking officials, in a second. But I want to share with you something very, very interesting. So what you see right now, this is something that nobody has ever seen in the past from Houthis. So this is a torpedo, and these torpedoes, they are deadly for any ship. In other words, unlike in the past where we have seen Houthis using just anti-ship missiles, this time and going forward, we will also see this kind of torpedoes in the Red Sea, where Houthis will be using them to target these ships, pro-Israeli ships or Israeli-owned ship, or Western ships like US, UK ship. Therefore, it is making their arsenal more enriched with advanced and new technological weapons. And these are what I think is happening, being supplied by Iran and maybe sometimes even Russia. Who knows? Maybe Hezbollah is also pitching in. But the point here is, guys, the situation in the Red Sea is going to get much worse for the rest of the world, while the Houthis will enjoy this technological advancement for the time being. At least we do not know what else they have in their arsenal. There is this report now that I have also put it on my thumbnail, sorry, not the thumbnail, on the title, where I said, when I saw this report, I decided to say this on my title. Basically, it says that the IDF, okay, or the ITF, they are running away from the forces. So as per ITF, 80 Israeli soldiers killed since Lebanon ground invasion, and I put the number way higher than this, nearly 1,000 injured and maimed. In the name of helping the injured, listen to this, in the name of helping the injured, okay, many ITF men are finding an excuse to run away from the battlefield, never to return. This is coming after news where it was reported on Israeli media that 130 soldiers, they have said, we are not going to fight anymore until the hostages are being released. These ITF terrorists, they're not getting desperate in the sense that they do not want to fight anymore, because they see no point in this. As Yoav Gallant himself said, that Israel is fighting a war that has no compass, quote unquote. No compass means they have no goal. They do not know where this will go. And therefore, they are suffering losses, mental health problems, and many other problems. So this is one of those news that social media right now is talking about. cracks are starting to appear in the Zionist genocide machine despite the regime's heavy censorship campaign. Another fighter pilot, overwhelmed by the trauma of butchering tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians, has committed suicide. Now, the problem with this kind of reporting, or the problem with how we interpret this kind of incident, is that, oh, this soldier must have felt sympathy for the people of Gaza, the children of Gaza. But that is really not the case. That is really not the reason why they commit suicide. They commit suicide because they cannot live with themselves. It is not they all of a sudden they feel bad for these people, for the people of Gaza, or especially the children and the women. It is just that they, wake up and they're like, man, I have no purpose of living, because if I leave, I will get killed either, or I will have to kill someone. So their life has become very, very vicious. And this is why you are seeing this kind of reports. His name is he's a combat navigator. His name is Asaf Dagan. This guy right behind me, he took his own life, and this happened only in the last hour or so. So Israeli Air Force veteran commits suicide. IDF denies him military honors. His family blast on IDF says these are absurd rules. Netanyahu, to be honest with you, he is, when he will be chased by his own people and be brought to justice, I do not know what kind of justice they're looking for. He will, we will see something very special when he will be held accountable by his own people. And I believe that his own people will hold him accountable because of these losses, disregarding their honor. This guy, he served in the Israeli military, helping them killing children in Gaza, committing this genocide. And nevertheless, the Netanyahu government doesn't want to respect their sacrifices, quote unquote. So this happened after this report published on May this year. 10 IOF or ITF officers and soldiers have committed suicide since October 7. So this number already started to grow from the very beginning of this genocide. And you can see in May, they had 10 of them. And now the number is going to go higher and higher, because there are multiple other reports suggesting that this ITF terrorist forces, they're taking their own lives. Now, when we talk about trauma and all that, let's take a look at this guy. He is crying over the death of one of his relatives who served in the ITF, and he is so devastated. He is so traumatized by the loss of it. Okay. It's funny. How they feel so bad for their own people, but they don't feel anything for the people of Gaza, for the children of Gaza. But guys, their sins, their crimes are catching up to them. There is no doubt about that. Now, when we talk about all of these lunatics who are absolutely clueless as to why they are in this war, what is their future, they don't even know if the state will exist. We also have to point out another party in this, which that is gaining a lot of strength by spending more on their defense budget. As we say, every country has the right to defend itself, not just Israel. So this time it is Iran. So Iran's government said that the country's military budget is projected to increase over 200% for the next Iranian calendar year. Today, the parliament approved general outlines of the national budget bill and will continue to work on and vote on the details in the coming session. So in other words, Iran has doubled down on their military budget, and we have already mentioned how they have installed AD-120 missile defense system. They have also, I think it was called Bavar, something like that. There was also a missile defense system that they worked on from November of last year. And these are all domestically made defense systems. So you can imagine how they are becoming so advanced in that. Now, obviously, we do not never run out of lunatics, people who are mentally disturbed. And I have come across this chef. Her name is Brooke Vevsky, cooking for the Zionists, for the ITF forces in Israel, and feeding them. If you see her on social media, you know what to do. Just complain or report her page to TikTok, to Instagram, to whoever, because I know they will not take action because they're also pro-Zionist, pro-Israel, pro-terrorist. But do your job. This is what we can do really anyways. And now let's talk about the casualties, the military, the elite forces that are getting killed left and right in Gaza. And so this is what was reported. The Israeli military reported that Officer Yohanathan and many other, these four, including one officer, got killed. According to their statement, an additional officer from the same unit was critically injured in the same engagement. The soldiers belonged to the elite multidimensional unit, also known as the Right Unit, which specializes in operations across challenging terrains and all battlefronts. Reports from the Israeli military indicate that the four soldiers were killed when an explosive device detonated inside the building in Jabalia. Obviously, we also know at the same time that Jabalia camp is being massacred, and because they cannot find or they cannot fight, I should say, real men, what the ITF forces they're doing is they're calling in aerial bombardment through their fighter jets and causing a lot of deaths. There are hundreds and hundreds of people right now in the northern Palestine are getting killed. And we have some of the pictures of these pigs. You can see their faces here. They went to kill children and burn people alive in Palestine, but they end up getting killed themselves. So these are the four pigs. Rest in hell, guys. Rest in hell. Then we also have other reports saying that Jabalia, under siege and relentless bombardment for nearly a month, has witnessed significant destruction and loss of life, with at least 115 Palestinians killed in Israeli raids across Gaza since dawn today. These are also coming on the Israeli news outlets like Jerusalem Post and also on the Times of Israel. But most of the time what you find is what is happening with ITF, what action they're taking, and all those kind of news, instead of showing the death in Palestine, the genocide in Palestine. And obviously, I think it was expected. This is why right now nobody really cares about ITF casualties, none of those things. Recently, we have seen that the UN, they have decided not to report anything about the killing of UN staffers by the Zionist state. This is exactly what is happening right now. Take a look at this particular video. This person, he was asked this question: why United Nations is not reporting or naming those people who are getting killed by ITF in Lebanon?
Did I miss it, or did you mention an UNRWA staff member that was killed yesterday?
I can confirm, yes. I can confirm that a member of the UN Relief and Works Agency, one of the drivers, was killed when his vehicle had been shot at by the IDF, yes.
And the vehicle was a UN marked vehicle, yes or no?
This was a UN marked vehicle, yes.
Farhan, why don't we mention this anymore? Have we become so numb to the fact that Israel is killing UN personnel and there are now 233 that are dead that we don't even mention it anymore?
Unfortunately, I did neglect to add this amid the other notices that we've had, but the sad truth is that there's so much devastation to report that as you see, I've just gone over about 20 minutes worth of stuff without even getting to that part.
Okay, unbelievable.
Now, North Korea's latest missile test has set off international alarm, intensifying fears that Pyongyang is actively preparing for confrontation. And our next story analyzes North Korea's launch of one of its most powerful intercontinental ballistic missiles. Take a look at this report.
In a display of military might, North Korea unleashes its most powerful intercontinental ballistic missile, dramatically escalating tensions. Kim Jong-un personally oversees the missile test, a solid fuel intercontinental ballistic missile that shatters previous performance records. The weapon's extraordinary flight path, spanning 620 kilometers, places the entire US mainland within devastating reach. This technological leap represents a critical moment in North Korea's nuclear ambitions. With an unprecedented 87-minute flight time, the solid fuel weapon offers strategic advantages that dramatically enhance North Korea's military capabilities. Unlike liquid fuel alternatives, these missiles require minimal preparation, making detection and interception exponentially more challenging. The launch drew condemnation from South Korea, Japan, and the US.
Do something about it.
We reiterate our stern warning that North Korea will bear full responsibility for any consequences that arise.
I call upon them to cease their potentially destabilizing behavior in both the Indo-Pacific region and now in the European theater as well.
In a rapid reaction to the deaths, the US and South Korea conducted a significant joint air drill, deploying F-35A, F-15K, and KF-16 fighters, as well as US Marine Corps aircraft in a show of force aimed at North Korea. South Korean officials voiced fears that Moscow could be providing Pyongyang the advanced technology or military expertise in exchange for North Korean troops, further increasing the security risk for neighboring countries. As North Korea advances its nuclear deterrent capabilities and potentially deeper ties with Russia, the question looms: is Pyongyang gearing up for a larger, more dangerous confrontation? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Cool figure. Follow me.